So we know everyone's distracted right now with all the Trump stuff and the assassination attempt, and that seems to be the topic of the day, obviously and understandably. But we are really excited to present this webinar to you guys. It's actually it's one of the most credible UFO cases. I wouldn't even call it a UFO case. I mean, this is a mission to another planet where we sent
Yeah.
12 astronauts, 12 US astronauts to another planet for 13 years. And they came back and were debriefed, and that information was leaked. And I would say this is like profound information that literally rewrites ufology and changes the history of everything we know, but it is not that well known about. I mean, not that many people know. We were just in Devil's Tower and we asked the people we were with, and none of them had heard of it. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
the whole thing, Aaron?
Yeah, it's not that well known outside of the ufology circle. And even then, like it was a little bit more well known in ufology in like the 90s because it was the internet before the internet what it is today. So this type of stuff was mostly circulated through email chains and email threads. So because of that, it was kind of circulated a bit in like the UFO community back in the 90s. But since then, the popularity of it hasn't been what it was even then. And then until Len Kasten put out his book Journey to Planet Serpo, which I believe in 2013 is when the book came out. And that kind of reinvigorated the popularity and the knowledge of it out there. Again, only in the UFO community though, because like outside of that, who knows about like this is hidden history, right? This is history that's been suppressed and hidden from humanity. That's very important. That needs to be told, in my opinion.
Right.
So that's kind of what we're trying to do with this.
Yeah, and we could have made this one really long, but we decided to condense some of it. So you're going to get a Cliff Notes version of this story. We're going to focus primarily on before they left and when they got back. We are going to get into some of what happened while they were on the planet, but there is literally so much that we just can't cover it without making this like a 6 hour webinar. So there, we would exhaust ourselves, and we don't want you guys to lose interest in it because there's so much to cover. So if you want the full story, we're going to provide you with all the sources that you need to read it and look it up and research it. So I guess let me just share the screen first, and then we'll get started. We'll just dive into this unless you have anything else to say beforehand, Aaron.
No, let's dive in. I'm excited. It's going to be a really good one.
Okay, so here we go. A true story of interplanetary travel, Project Crystal Knight's secret journey to planet Serpo. So I just found this on Twitter this morning whenever I was researching and looking up all the stuff with the Trump assassination attempt and all the theories that are being thrown around. And I found this very interesting, and it kind of stresses the importance of the UFO topic right now and how it's not just like a woo topic, and there's actual serious threats, and not serious threats from the ETs, but there's serious threats to certain people's lives for disclosing this information. And we're going to let this guy, who I'm actually not sure who this is, we're going to play this clip and set the stage for this webinar.
But I know, for example, Trump's been briefed. You know what's going on? He's scared. He's scared they're going to kill him if he reveals what he knows. That's what I've been told. You have a situation where your potential president is terrified of speaking about the UAP issue because he's scared they're going to knock him. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. This is serious. You know, you have a national scandal at the heart of this. It's not just about UFOs, it's about your country. It's totally screwed unless you resolve this issue. It should be the dominant political issue. If you can get this secret out, the world will change overnight. And I've heard that from people in the program. They're deeply, deeply angry that this secret is being suppressed. They see no good reason. One of the reasons it's being suppressed is because America has made weapons, dreadful weapons. Are you proud of that? Is that really what we want to do from technology that we've obtained by using offensive weaponry against a fairly benevolent non-human intelligence? Is that really how we want to define our first contact? Because that's what we're talking about here. And I don't know how to communicate this more seriously.
And there you go. I
There you
agreed
go.
with him. Everything he said, I think, like you said, Aaron, it's gold. I mean, it's a matter of national security. People's lives are in danger. And I just thought it was the perfect video to start with to stress the importance of this topic.
And well, this shows you the people, the nature of the people covering this stuff up and what lengths they'll go to keep that cover up, because they're terrified of you knowing the truth and of the truth getting out, which is why they'll literally try to take out a current or former president, as we literally just yesterday saw an attempt on Trump's life. And that probably had a lot more to do with even just this, obviously, but that's the people behind the scenes who, this obviously needs to change, and it is changing. And, the more this information can get out there, the more you can speak about it, the more the truth can get out, the less power they have to keep covering it up.
And I just had to make this slide because why not?
Yep, right there.
Narcissist, a narcissist, the person who rewrites history to avoid accountability. So that's important because what we're noticing with the ufology topic is that they're counting on all of the younger generations, the millennials, whatever you want to call them, to not research what happened in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they're trying, and it's proof. There's new reports that are literally less than nothing burgers are proof that they are not acknowledging this stuff. And they're trying to erase history, rewrite history to avoid accountability because they all have blood on their hands. And it's a scandal. Like that guy said, it's a national scandal. And they're trying to figure out a way to do this without telling on themselves. So they're hoping that people like us won't keep bringing this stuff up, and that's not going to happen. I take it as a personal responsibility to just relay this information to anyone who doesn't know about this. Okay, and then this is just me actually reading from the first page of the Secret Journey to Planet Serpo book, which we reference quite a bit in this webinar, and I'll show you some of the other books that we reference as well, but we'll go ahead and play this really quick. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Anonymous. I am a retired employee of the U.S. government. I won't go into any great details about my past, but I was involved in a special program. With those words, sent in an email to Victor Martinez, the host and moderator of perhaps the largest and most prestigious space-related email network on the internet, known as the UFO Thread List, a totally new era of government transparency commenced. It was sent to Martinez on November 2nd, 2005, followed by incredible facts about what the government knows about alien visitations. Anonymous then sent in 18 more emails to the network, each more sensational than the last. The first batch continued through August 1st, 2006. He sent in 14 more emails between June 4th, 2007 and April 13th, 2011, revealing top secret information that had previously been classified as top secret code word, the highest security classification in the government. The email postings by Anonymous mainly concerned the events following the Roswell crash that led to an interstellar exchange program in which we sent 12 U.S. military personnel to a distant planet on an alien spaceship in 1965. This program was directed and monitored by the Defense Intelligence Agency. The DIA called the program Project Crystal Night, and Anonymous, then much younger, was allegedly one of the agency officials assigned to the project. It is now popularly known as Project Serpo.
It became quite a mainstay in early ufology of the 1990s, given that in addition to Request Anonymous telling this extraordinary story, there were several alleged DIA or Defense Intelligence Agency officials who were also coming in and saying, yeah, we have knowledge of this case too, and we can verify what Request Anonymous is talking about. And so it kind of spun off from there and has still remained a talking point in the modern UFO narratives.
So that's important too, and that's a clip from, I guess it's like a roundtable podcast where these people are discussing the Serpo mission and they're going through all the material. But the one of the things that we thought it was important to share was that there are many DIA officials and many people within the government or the shadow government, whatever you want to call it, that have come forward and verified that this mission actually did happen.
Right. And that, by the way, is Micah Hanks. He's a well-known ufologist. So he knows what he's talking about as well.
Right. So then the question is, why now? Why did all this information just suddenly hit the internet? Well, in the book, The Secret Journey to Planet Serpo, Anonymous chose the date of November 2nd, 2005, because it is precisely 25 years after the final report on Project Crystal Night was written in 1980. Government policy allows for the declassification and disclosure of secret documents after that quarter century period. So he precisely waited 25 years to the date to release this stuff and then online on an internet thread called The List, which we're going to get into. We tried to leave no stone left unturned here. So just bear with us. It's going to take us a while to really explain it all and make sense of everything. But if you were wondering why now, and okay, so there's planet Serpo. Turns out that that might not be the actual real name of the planet. It's a name that our government gave to the planet because we didn't know what it was called. And this is one of the explanations: secret exchange reconnaissance planetary operation. That's from Richard Doty, right, Aaron?
Yeah. Well,
Right.
think
So
about it. The ETs don't exactly speak English or
right.
anything close to what we consider a normal language. So we had to kind of name the planet ourselves. And supposedly this is what well, there's two different, the R supposedly is interchangeable with a different word, which is remote is the other one. So it's either secret exchange reconnaissance planetary operation or secret exchange remote planetary operation.
Right, and we'll let Richard Doty explain that in this next clip. But
Right.
and he is the one who has actually given us both different names for it. So maybe there isn't like a solid label they have given it. It's just kind of a loose acronym, right?
Right. Right.
EBE provided us with advanced communications and other technology from the craft. A communications link was established between Earth and EBE's home planet, which the U.S. intelligence agency called Serpo. Now today, I'm going to tell you exactly what Serpo means. I don't think this has ever been disclosed before. Secret extraterrestrial remote planet operations, and that was coined by the Defense Intelligence Agency. EBE civilization created a method to communicate faster than light speed. EBE wanted to set up the process in order to get back to his home planet. Remember, he was in the Corona crash site. He was recovered. He was being cared for by us, U.S. Army, Air Force back then, but he missed home. He wanted to go home. Unfortunately, he died in 1952, but he gave us enough information and taught us some of his language in order for us to continue this communications between Earth and his own planet. And I believe the time frame between sending a signal and getting it back was approximately 9 months. Now remember, Serpo was in a Zeta Reticuli star group, which was 37.9 light years away. So instead of sending a signal would take 37 years or 38 years to get there, another 38 years to get back, which wasn't practical, we were able to do everything based on the EBE or the EBEN communications device in about a 9-month period.
So I know he's kind of jumping ahead with some of that stuff, and we're going to explain this more chronologically. But like I said, just bear with us here. But we really just wanted to stress the importance of where the name comes from, why it's called Serpo, just some basic things that we need to understand before moving forward. And, how all the communication was established. The original EBEN that they were communicating with was the lone survival from the early Roswell crash. And these are two of the books that we reference quite a bit. The Secret Journey to Planet Serpo, which was the original one I read, how I even discovered this. And it's interesting how I was led to this book. No one told me about this. I was in a metaphysical bookstore and I just happened to stumble across this book on the shelf years ago. And I was like, what is this? I read the back and I had to buy and read it. And it was kind of life changing, actually, because it made me aware of all the stuff that you don't learn about on the History Channel. And then,
Right.
and then Project Serpo. So this is actually a really important book because it we're going to learn about an email list, an email thread where all these government officials were sharing information, classified information, and that's where this information was originally leaked, and then it was turned into a Serpo website. But that website is not what it used to be, and you can still find some information on the website, but this is literally transcribed. It's the transcribed email thread as it happened from like 2006 or 2005 and on. And it has everything. If you want the information directly from the horse's mouth, this is the book that you need. And, Len Caston in this book, he summarizes it and turns it more into of a chronological story. But this is as it hit the email thread. And then we'll reference this interview a lot on Gaia TV, Project Serpo, the Planet Exchange program with Richard Doty and Emery Smith. Just so you guys know where we're getting this information, along with other places online and even some other books that we'll reference later. But moving forward, Aaron, did you want to read this? We're going to get into the movie. So we just went to Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and that's what kind of inspired this trip. So if you want to take this one, Aaron.
Sure. Project Serpo, Steven Spielberg's 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, is based on the famous Holloman landing as well as the human ET exchange depicted at the very end with 10 men and 2 women who are shown embarking on the alien spacecraft. So
So if you
apparently Close Encounters of the Third Kind is disclosure of Project Serpo or Project Crystal Knight as the mission is actually called.
Right, and this is the famous scene at the end where 12 U.S. astronauts board this craft and leave with what look like the EBEs. They're not identified as EBEs in the movie. I just rewatched this the other day just to kind of refresh my memory. It's kind of a slow film, but it's really, really interesting. The Whenever you understand what the Serpo mission is, you kind of know what to look for in this movie, and it makes it a lot better, in my opinion, when you
Yeah.
know that they're disclosing a real mission.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think like just last weekend or something, this was in theaters again as an anniversary. This movie, which I find interesting too, that they're bringing it back. And I know Spielberg is working on a couple other new ET movie and then another Alien movie as well. So obviously they're trying to ramp this stuff up again. And then so this is what the movie. This is what I'm sorry. This is what the book says about the movie.
So the script, according to Hollywood producer Julia Phillips, Spielberg sat down and rewrote the entire script in one weekend in 1975 at the Sherry Netherland Hotel in New York City, so that almost none of Schrader's work remained in the finished product, and Schrader ended up with no screenwriting credit. For Spielberg to have written such a complex screenplay so fast in a hotel without doing the research this script obviously required would indicate that the story was given to him in advance. Okay, so I'm going to stop really quick. Spielberg is saying that he wrote the script in a weekend in 3 days, but all the evidence of the facts about it point to the fact that that would be physically impossible, basically, and that the script was actually given to him by someone else. That it was like, here's the script, this is the movie, you're putting it out, done, right? And then he has to say, oh yeah, I just wrote it really quickly in 3 days. Anyways, continuing. Since we know that all the facts of the screenplay were in accord with the actual events of Project Serpo, that is the only plausible conclusion. The script became basically locked in place after that with only minor modifications approved by Spielberg. that was a very unusual process in Hollywood where screenplays are generally written by screenwriters, not directors, frequently take weeks or months to write, and normally go through many changes based on the input of the producers and studio execs. Not this one.
Right. So, I mean, that's interesting, and it goes on to tell a lot more about it. But to have a Hollywood film that was written in a weekend, essentially with no rewrites, is almost impossible.
It
And if
it doesn't
anyone in the
happen.
industry, if
Yeah.
anyone in the industry knows movies, sometimes these rewrites take months and years even. Um,
And
I need to,
the director is usually never the writer of the actual movie. That's a very, very rare thing as well. So the fact that he's saying he wrote it and directed it, and he wrote it so quickly in 3 days, no rewrites, it's just a couple tiny little minor things. No, it's just not. It's not the case, especially when we understand the Serpo information and that it's literally disclosing Serpo. It's pretty obvious at that point that you can say this was handed to him and he was told to put it out as a movie.
right. All right. So a secret set. And then there was a secrecy. The Close Encounters set near Mobile, Alabama, took on the aspect of a top secret military facility, according to John Baxter and Steven Spielberg, the unauthorized biography. Mobile came the most hermetic of closed sets. Cast and crew worked, ate, sometimes even slept inside the stifling hangar, which 150 tons of air conditioning equipment, enough for 30 large houses, did little to make it habitable. Nobody entered without a name badge. Even Spielberg himself, who lived in a Winnebago parked outside, was briefly barred when he forgot his credentials.
His name badge. Yeah.
When he forgot his badge. Yeah. Scripts were numbered and distributed on a need to know basis. Most actors only got their own lines. In this case, the security was so severe that clearly something else was operating. It would be fair to speculate that Spielberg perhaps knew that he was dealing with the release of highly classified information and didn't want to risk having the government shut him down on the basis of the compromise of national security.
Yep. Absolutely. It's the only explanation for that, in my
Right.
opinion, as well.
Exactly.
So
I mean,
again,
if
corroborates the fact that he was given the script and it's a real.
Well, the fact that there wasn't a movie set, it was actually filmed on a military base, a top
Yeah,
secret facility,
right,
actually, and that even Spielberg was getting turned away at the gate if he didn't have his badge.
right,
Just shows you the level of secrecy and security and who was actually behind this.
right.
And then this is actually a clip from the movie. This is the 12 astronauts, 10 men, 2 women, which we'll get into that in a minute, but this is a scene of them all getting off the bus and getting ready to board the craft. This is them in prayer before they leave, which also happened according to the book. So there's a lot in the movie that actually happened that it makes the movie fascinating actually if you understand all this stuff. And then okay, so I call this bold claims and misinterpretations. It's actually a good clip, but what this guy says in this clip is this is a perfect example of how us researchers can misinterpret information. So this guy, they're coming at this from more of a skeptic standpoint, and he's claiming that he's like, well, the book basically says that Spielberg was handed the script as a matter of fact. And that's the way this guy understood it. And he's like, that seems like a bold claim to make. But if we go back, it says since we know that all the facts of the screenplay were in accord to the actual events of Project Serpo, that is the only plausible conclusion. So they're
Right,
not saying Len Kasten isn't saying that Spielberg was handed the script. He's saying that's the only plausible conclusion. But if you
right.
listen to this guy and his conclusion, he misinterpreted what he read. And this is where we can go wrong as researchers by misinterpreting just simple bits of information. It can create an entire ripple effect and chain of events. And you kind of lose sight of the original story.
Okay, real quick, to put it another way, this guy, the way this guy says it, you would think that Len Kasten is the only source of information for why people think he was handed the script, or like as if Lynn, like you said, as if Lynn said, "Oh, Steven Miller was handed the script," and that's all he said. Well, that's not. He's pointed out to the facts of the situation that he's saying the only conclusion I can make is that he had to have been handed the script based on the facts, and he presents you with those facts, which you can come to your own conclusion based on the facts that he presents, which are verifiable. And it's pretty misleading that this guy, I'm assuming he didn't intentionally do that, obviously, but somebody just listening to this roundtable, hearing this guy say that could easily be like, oh, okay, well, that's BS if only one guy is saying it, and they completely missed the actual facts. Anyways.
Well, exactly, and it's important to bring up too, because if you're a researcher and you just go straight to the debunkers, and you listen to somebody like this, then you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that does make sense. But then
Right.
not understanding, not having done your own research, that he misinterpreted, that the debunker misinterpreted the information, because
Right.
there's a level of confirmation bias that happens with everyone. So here, let's just play the clip.
Yeah, and Kasten pretty directly says things like, Anonymous gave the Serpo story to Spielberg. I mean, just straight up says that's what happened.
But that's
doesn't
not
really
true.
offer any
That's not true.
evidence of that happening. Like
He did offer evidence.
Here's the little story book that he gave him, or something like that. But Kasten is that convinced that he just will say straight up.
And do we know the origins of these emails or how the story leaked?
We do, and that's an interesting point we should make also, especially given that Request Anonymous insinuates things along those lines, because although the purported events occur in the 60s, and this actually having its origins back in the 1940s with Roswell, the story starts coming out when Victor Martinez receives these emails from Request Anonymous. Now, initially, there had been skepticism. A lot of people were looking at this and saying, well, I mean, how do we know who this insider is? It did help somewhat, though, that there were alleged former Defense Intelligence Agency officials who were also coming on board and saying, well, we have knowledge of this, too. We can speak to that point. We think that the Serpo exchange really did happen. And it seemed to bolster this idea in a lot of people's minds. And just to further contextualize this, I mean, this was all occurring really around the same time that we were having people like, well, in the previous decade and spilling over into the 90s, still a lot of discussion about Paul Benowitz, about the Majestic 12 papers. Of course, there was interest in Roswell. There was also interest in that primarily, by the way, because in 1980, the publication of the Roswell incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore. But then we also, of course, had Area 51 in the public imagination due to Bob Lazar, him coming out and discussing his experiences at S4. So there's an interesting tie-in with some of that, and that particularly the Benowitz affair and the involvement of Air Force Office of Special Investigations Special Agent Rick Doty, who seems to kind of remain this sort of nexus point of all these kinds of things at times.
Right. So he also brings up the importance of Richard Doty, who a lot of people have problems with, because, well, Aaron, you might want to explain, you can explain that better than I can, why people kind of, write off Richard Doty sometimes.
So Richard Doty he's a former Air Force intelligence operative, and he was a disinformation agent. Like, he was a counterintelligence, like, disinformation guy who he was basically, his job a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, was to put out false information, disinformation. So so understandably, a lot of people have a problem with Richard Doty because they're like, well, how do we not know he's not still doing that? Like, he could still be lying. Like, doesn't that ruin his credibility entirely? Well, you could make that argument, and that's completely understandable. Or you could, maybe he is wanting to come, tell the truth now about what really happened. And obviously, like anything, don't just believe something because someone says it, no matter who it's coming from. Take it, look at what it corroborates with. So you can tell when someone's telling the truth by doing your research and saying, hey, this guy's saying this, and this lines up, like we're doing with this webinar, it lines up with all this other stuff. So most likely he's telling the truth, but again, that's up to each individual to decide. But that's why a lot of people have a problem with Doty, because they want to just anytime he's involved with anything, oh, Richard Doty, like, I can't believe a word he says because he's his
Well,
former guy.
in in this case, I think he is being sincere, and
Absolutely.
everything just lines up and it makes sense and it feels right. So,
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely. Like, he doesn't have, right. Like, to me, coming out with the Serpo information, like, there's no motive to me of why he would be lying about all these specific details of the Serpo.
well, it's not because it's not his information. He was just
Right.
briefed on it, and then
Right. Right.
everything he says is verified in these books. But
Right.
let's move on. So an EBEN, what is an EBEN? How did they come up with that name? Extraterrestrial biological entity. MJ12 decided to refer to the Roswell aliens as EBENs. This was simply an unimaginative
Derivation.
derivation. Oh my God.
Derivation.
I've been
It's
getting
all-
tongue-tied. Of the EBE, standing for extraterrestrial biological entity. After being comfortably ensconced at Los Alamos, the alien who was given the designation EBE-1 by MJ12 willingly cooperated in attempting to overcome the communication barrier. But the language differences were huge and seemed insurmountable. As shown in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg's 1977 movie, the EBEN language consisted of tonal variations and sounded almost musical. One contributor to the Serpo website described it as high-pitched singing. So if you remember the end of the movie when they're communicating with the EBENs, they're playing all these tones and colors, and they start playing like almost like a musical, and that's how they communicate with them. It's very interesting the way they depict it in the movie.
Hence why they had to come up with a name for their planet, because
Right.
you can't just use a
Well,
tone and sing it. Yeah, it's
Well, it does say in the diaries whenever they landed on the planet that they were welcome to the planet, and they even said something in their language, but they didn't understand what it meant.
right,
Um,
right.
but whenever they started getting comfortable with speaking English, even the Ebens for on our behalf started referring to it as Serpo as well, just because it was easier for us.
You're right, right,
Um,
right.
Some of the sounds were not even reproducible by the Americans. For the entire 5 year period that EBE-1 remained alive, he was only able to teach the Los Alamos scientists about 30% of the EBE language. Anonymous reported that complex sentences and numbers could not be recognized. EBE-1 identified a piece of equipment found intact on the alien craft as a communications device for sending and receiving messages from his home planet, and he showed the scientists how to use it, but they couldn't get it to work. So no communications with his planet were possible for 5 years until just prior to his death in the summer of 1952, when one of the scientists realized that the device had to be powered by the energy source on the alien craft. So that's just important to understand, because how were we able to communicate with them? Well, they did have a communications device, and it took us some time to understand how to use it, but we eventually did. And then that's where this whole EBEN exchange program even began, whenever we started communicating with them. So there's an email list, and this is where all the information was being shared in 2005.
So Bill
Bill
Ryan, as
Ryan,
many of you know, used to be Carrie Cassidy's partner for Project Camelot for years,
right.
for a stretch of time, and that ended, I think, like 8 years ago or so, something like that. But that's who
I have a picture
Bill
of him.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a picture of him coming up. But Bill Ryan, who later published the website for the list, the Serpo website, explained it this way. He said the list at the time contained about 150 people, including many extremely well-known names in UFO research and related or leading-edge scientific fields. Those on the list have differing views regarding the veracity of Anonymous's claims. However, the pedigree of the list as a whole is important to emphasize. There has been a substantial amount of intelligent discussion about the revelations, and it is important to state that there are many senior people in the U.S. intelligence and military community who are taking this information very seriously. So that's Bill Ryan's take on the email list. And just so you guys can see what the original email looked like, thanks to this book, I was able to find it. The original email, is there a date on here? I don't think there is. The original email that hit this list from Request Anonymous, this was it, verbatim as it was shared with the list, with the people in the group.
So this is the original posting by Anonymous, the key information provider on this site. Also included are 3 responses and seemingly independent verifications of the information. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Request Anonymous. I'm a retired employee of the U.S. government. I won't go into any great details about my past, but I was involved in a special program. As for Roswell, it occurred, but not like the storybooks tell. There were 2 crash sites, one southwest of Corona, New Mexico, and the second site at Pelona Peak, south of Datil, New Mexico. The crash involved 2 extraterrestrial aircraft. The Corona site was found a day later by an archaeology team. This team reported the crash site to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department. A deputy arrived the next day and summoned a state police officer. One live entity, EBE or EBE, was found hiding behind a rock. The entity was given water but declined food. The entity was later transferred to Los Alamos. The information eventually went to Roswell Army Airfield. The site was examined and all evidence was removed. The bodies were taken to Los Alamos National Laboratory because they had a freezing system that allowed the bodies to remain frozen for research. The aircraft was taken to Roswell and then on to Wright Field, Ohio. The second site was not discovered until August 1949 by 2 ranchers. They reported their findings several days later to the sheriff of Catron County, New Mexico. Because of the remote location, it took the sheriff several days to make his way to the crash site. Once at the site, the sheriff took photographs and then drove back to Datil. Sandia Army Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico, was then notified. A recovery team from Sandia took custody of all evidence, including 6 bodies. The bodies were taken to Sandia Base, but later transferred to Los Alamos.
The live entity established communications with us and provided us with a location of his home planet. That's important. The entity remained alive until 1952 when he died, but before his death, provided us with a full explanation of the items found inside the 2 crafts. One item was a communication device. The entity was allowed to make contact with his planet. Somehow, I never knew this information, but a meeting date was set for April 1964 near Alamogordo, New Mexico. The aliens landed and retrieved the bodies of their dead comrades. Information was exchanged. Communication was in English. The aliens had a translation device. In 1965, we had an exchange program with the aliens. We carefully selected 12 military personnel, 10 men, 2 women. They were trained, vetted, and carefully removed from the military system. The 12 were skilled in various specialties. Near the northern part of the Nevada test site, the aliens landed and the 12 Americans left. One entity was left on Earth. The original plan was for our 12 people to stay for 10 years and then return to Earth. But something went wrong. The 12 remained until 1978, when they were returned to the same location in Nevada. 7 men and 1 woman returned. 2 died on the aliens' home planet. 2 others decided to remain, according to the returnees. Of the 8 that returned, all have died. The last survivor died in 2002. The returnees were isolated from 1978 until 1984 at various military installations. The Air Force Office of Special Investigation was responsible for their security and safety, also conducted debriefing sessions with the returnees. I have never seen or read anything about the exchange program. I once heard a little bit of information from Linda Howe, but she didn't have much information. I've monitored your emails for about 6 months. I've read emails from you and others, but I've never seen nor heard the truth about the real Roswell incident or the exchange program. I'd like to hear what others say about this. So that was the original email that hit the thread, the list in 2005, which I think is significant. He tells a different story of Roswell that none of the group in the email list was talking about, which there was 2 craft and 9 total bodies, 1 survivor. 1 craft landed in 1947, the other in 1949. Now, what they don't say is something that we learn in the Sands of Times book. The crash in 1949 that the 2 ranchers found and eventually shared with the police, according to the Sands of Time, both the Roswell crash, the 1947 crash, there were two craft that crashed at the exact same time. But because of some weird time anomaly or time dilation, essentially an issue of time travel here, one craft landed in 1947 and the other one crash landed in 1949 at the exact same time. But from
Mhm.
our linear perspective, it didn't crash until 2 years later.
Right.
But the Sands of Time explains how both craft actually crashed at the same exact time, and from their perspective. But from our perspective, it was 2 years later.
Right. Richard Doty and others will say that they crashed at the same time, but the other one was only discovered 2 years later. But according, like you said, according to Sands of Time, the other one actually didn't crash until 2 years later, even though they crashed at the same time, which is hard for us to fit our minds around.
Right.
But that would explain why it took so long for the other one to be discovered, because it
There,
didn't
there,
actually show
right.
up until 2 years later.
There's no way they would have a crashed UFO would have gone left unnoticed for 2 years
For 2 years.
near the site of the original.
Right.
I mean, they would have, scoured
Right.
the area.
Right. That
So
doesn't even make any sense. So that, yeah, the Sands of Time, to me, that
right.
lines up. Yeah.
So there is something called the Red Book, which is important to understand, and it gives credibility to Anonymous, who was releasing information on this website. So, Aaron, if you want to read this one, this talks about Red Book and how Anonymous was involved.
Then on August 9th, 2007, Anonymous sent the following message elaborating on the use of the Red Book and revealing his role in producing and editing the entries in the book. The Red Book is an extremely thick, very detailed account summary written and compiled by the U.S. government on UFO investigations dating from 1947 to the present day. This orange-brownish book is updated every 5 years. Claims about the Red Book being updated continuously or when needed are somewhat true, but need to be placed in proper context. What actually occurs is that the UFO reports come in and are deemed credible by the reporting government agency, be it military or civilian. They are routed to a special section of our government for a follow-up analysis. After that vetting process, they are then sent to a special group, which then places them into final review for possible inclusion into the Red Book.
So Anonymous claims he was the editor of the Red Book, but editing doesn't actually mean editing as we understand it. It's choosing which cases are credible, what actually belongs in the book, in their opinion, and then it gets vetted, and the final cases eventually end up in the book. And there's a short video we're going to play right now where they explain the Red Book, that same roundtable that we referred to earlier.
So there's a thorough vetting process. It's not like they're just including every single thing that they come across into this book. There's a very thorough process for it to get included.
Right.
There's a cool little feature of the story, which is that Anonymous evidently claimed to be the editor of what's called the Red Book. And the Red Book is a book maintained by the government of every alien race that we have encountered. And it's updated every 5 years. And the editor of the book, and as you use the word editor, you think, is he checking for punctuation, and not that type of editor, but compiling these cases. And then it's that person's task to present the edits or the additions to the book to the sitting United States president. They would be briefed in that manner. So this is a detail that I just found fascinating, and you can't help hear Red Book and then think there's a Red Book and a Blue Book too. Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's another case where we mentioned some of them earlier, but even more additional anecdotes and additional cases and rumors that are crossing over with it. It almost, when you first read it, it seems like a really random construction, but as we've been picking it apart, it's got all of these potential components to it.
All right. So now that we understand that what the Red Book is, and that Request Anonymous was editor of the Red Book, this is why he had the Serpo information in the first place. And then he released the Serpo information onto the email thread. And now we're going to get into how the email thread was turned into a website. And the website was developed by Bill Ryan, who we know was co-host of Project Camelot with Carrie Cassidy in the early days. And Bill Ryan has this to say about the website. Any skepticism about the Serpo revelations by Anonymous among list members largely evaporated As he sent in more and more details about the program to the list network, it soon became very clear that this account of detail, some of which they could personally attest to or had already heard about, could not have been invented. Consequently, on December 21st, 2005, network members decided to launch a website dedicated to the revelations of Anonymous. To that end, a longtime well-respected British member of the network named Bill Ryan volunteered to create and moderate the website named www.serpo.org. That website ultimately became fleshed out with additional material from other anonymous contributors, from postings by Martinez, who added supplementary explanations relating to the information revealed by Anonymous and other insiders. The result was an amazing compendium of government knowledge about our relations with aliens from across the galaxy. And I'm sorry, this wasn't a quote from Bill Ryan. This was a quote from Len Kasten. So this is the website today. It's very insignificant. You go to it, it has basically nothing. The only thing it talks about is a conference that happened this year, and that's it. And there's no information about the conference, no replays, not even, there's barely any information. It happened in Tennessee in April. That's all we know. And there is a blog which you can go and read different articles and different stuff about the Serpo mission, and potentially it could lead you to the original list of emails. But I'm gathering from what I've seen on this website that it is not the original website that Bill Ryan created.
And actually, I have heard that you can still see the original website through the Wayback Machine.
Oh, really?
And I'm just now thinking about that. Let me check that out real quick.
Well, that would be great if we could. But either way, this is what happens
Right.
when you type in serpo.org now. And I even tried to email them, and it just gave me the wheel of death. It wouldn't allow the email to go through. So, because I wanted to inquire about this conference that they just held in April, I wanted to see if I could listen or watch any of the presentations, but there was no, I could not send the email. So, and then
Yeah,
this
I'm
is just,
looking at the original website literally right now. I just went to the Wayback Machine. Just type
oh,
in,
great.
yeah, go to the Wayback Machine, type in serpo.org and go. I just went to like 2008, a year that I knew it would still be up. And it's right here.
Oh, great. That's
Mhm.
awesome. Maybe we can include screenshots of that in the final webinar
Right,
and
right.
the edited version. But no, that's amazing. Great find.
Well, everyone who's
So,
watching, you can check that out right now for yourself if you want. Just go to, I just Googled Wayback Machine. I think it's like web.archive.org, and search www.serpo.org, and then go back at least like 10 years of a snapshot of it, and you should be able to find it.
awesome. All right, so we're going to move on to a clip from Richard Doty from Cosmic Disclosure, where he's talking about the evidence of this actual mission.
And we were able to communicate with the other planet. Now, this is what this colonel is telling me. Now, in October of 2005, Victor Martinez, he had an email stream that he used for a number of years, a number of people on that stream. He contacted me and he said, I have this guy that's contacted me and said he was with DIA and he wanted to start releasing information about a Project Crystal Night. Do you know anything about it, Rick? And I said, you know what, Victor, I do know something about it, but I don't know if it's real or if it's some kind of military project that had happened, an exercise, or I could think of a lot of different things.
Right.
And he said, no, I know it's real because I've seen some evidence of it. I said, what kind of evidence did you see? I saw pictures of the planet. I said, you saw pictures of what planet? He said, Serpo. I said, who showed them to you? He said, this person that I want to introduce you to. So I flew out I was still working for Austin, Texas, and I flew out to California, Oceanside, met with Victor, and then I met with this former DI official named Joseph Yeager. He said, are you ready for this, me to hear about this project? And I said, well, is it for real? He said, yeah, it's for real. I said, well, you got any documents to prove it? He says, come to my house. And we were at a hotel a meeting in Oceanside, California.
Right.
But, so we went to his house. He lived in a really, really nice house. He had a cellar, and there's not too many places that have cellars anymore, but he had a cellar in his house in California. And we went in there, and he had these safes along the wall, like probably, I don't know, a dozen safes. And they were all GSA approved safes. So they were GSA safes. And having worked in the government, you know how
Right.
secure they are.
Yes.
He opened one up and brought a document over to me, laid it down. It was an Air Force OSI document. I looked at that document, and of course I recognized it, being I had been in the OSI. He said, read that. It was a real thick document. So I spent the next probably 30, 35 minutes going through this document. I said, holy cow. I spent all those years in OSI, and I never heard about this. So I said, so it's for real? He said, it's absolutely for real. Then he started pulling out other things and showing us, showing me and Victor. And I said, well, why do you have it here? I mean, this should be in a file of a DIA headquarters. How did you get it? He said, I can't answer that question. He said, and if you turn me over to the feds, those documents won't be here. I said, I'm not going to turn you over to the feds. I said, is this still classified? He said, I don't know. And I don't really care. I want it out in the public.
I think that's a huge testimony.
Oh yeah.
Amazing. I mean, we need these firsthand accounts of this type of information. I mean, that's how we can connect the dots and even present this stuff. So thank you for that, Richard.
Yes.
And then I was trying to find the most recent thing that I could find on Project Crystal Night. And the most recent thing looked like it was in 2018, and there was a FOIA request sent by Burke Williamson, and he requested that a copy of the following documents or any documents containing following information be provided to me. Records concerning the planning and execution of Project Crystal Night, descriptions or reports of an unidentified flying object crash site near Roswell. And he goes on and on about the Roswell stuff. And then he says, all records related to the management of Project Crystal Night, any information to include documents, electronic mail messages, meeting minutes, and or telephone conversation recordings about any program that conducted an exchange of ambassadors between Earth and other planets, any records containing details, planning information, and or mission logs to include communication logs from any attempt, successful or not, to make an interplanetary exchange of personnel occurring in 1964 and or 1965. I don't believe that was granted to him. I think that was closed. But either way, we have evidence of somebody at least trying to obtain information in 2018. I just thought that was interesting to add.
Yes.
And then this is William Cooper talking about an exchange program as well, but he has some different information, slightly different information as far as the number of people and some other stuff. So we're going to play this, and then we're going to compare the two and why we think he's talking about the same thing.
The treaty stated, the aliens would not interfere in our affairs and we would not interfere in theirs. We were particularly interested that they do not interfere with anything that would affect our future, which has been violated. We would keep their presence on Earth a secret. They would furnish us with advanced technology and would help us in our technological development. They would not make any treaty with any other Earth nation. They could abduct humans on a limited and periodic basis for the purpose of medical examination and monitoring of our development, with the stipulation that the humans would not be harmed, would be returned to their point of abduction, that the humans would have no memory of the event, and that the alien nation would furnish MJ-12 with a list of all human contacts and abductees on a regularly scheduled basis. And this is not being done. It was agreed that each nation would receive the ambassador of the other for as long as the treaty remained in force. It was further agreed that the alien nation and the United States would exchange 16 personnel each to the other with the purpose of learning each of the other. The alien guests would remain on Earth, and the human guests would travel to the alien point of origin for a specified period of time, then return, at which point a reverse exchange would be made. I have no knowledge whatsoever of what happened to those original 16 humans who left the Earth with the aliens. It was also agreed that bases would be constructed underground for the use of the alien nation, and that 2 bases would be constructed for the joint use of the alien nation and the United States government. The base at Dulce is one, the base at S4 in the area known as Area 51 or Dreamland is the second. Exchange of technology would take place in the jointly occupied bases. These alien bases would be constructed under Indian reservations in the four corners of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, and one would be constructed in Nevada in the area known as S4, located approximately 7 miles south of the western border of Area 51, otherwise known as Dreamland. All alien areas are under complete control of the Naval Department, and all personnel who work in these complexes receive their checks from the Navy. Construction of the bases began immediately, but progress was slow until large amounts of money were made available in 1957, and in the meantime, work continued on the Yellow Book with the information derived from the guests.
All right. So all very important information. And he mentions 16 personnel, 16 people leaving and going and spending time on another planet. Well, where does he get that number 16? We are going to get into that. I'm not going to explain it right now, but we will cover where 16 comes from. And it seems to be that he is talking about the Serpo mission. Now we're going to get into some of the presidents. President Eisenhower, the 34th president, ex-Pentagon consultant, says the President Eisenhower had 3 secret meetings with the aliens, according to the Serpo material and his emails. That did in fact happen. And the Serpo material also said Eisenhower was the last U.S. president to be fully briefed on ET involvement with our government. So, and William Cooper was just talking about the treaty that we signed, and Eisenhower allegedly signed that treaty in one of these meetings, but there's a whole controversy surrounding that subject, which we've heard Laura Eisenhower talk about. It seems like he didn't have a choice. He was kind of forced into signing the treaty or was blackmailed, but regardless, it wasn't what he wanted to do. And it seems that
or MJ12 just signed it behind his back without his knowledge at all.
Right. And he was the fall guy.
And he was the fall guy. Either way, it was not him on his own free will signing the treaty, which is what unfortunately gets propagated in the UFO community a lot, and people hate him because of it, and because of that, Laura gets all this hate because she's his great granddaughter, and it's just ridiculous. So we gotta dispel that myth.
Right. And so there is a major controversy, and I mean major, whenever you get into this material about the Ebens and the Greys. The people involved in the Serpo project are adamant that the Ebens are not the Greys that we signed the treaty with, that were abducting us and doing all those horrible things to us. But the information, the more you get into this and more you connect the dots, it's hard to find a line that divides the Ebens and Greys. I don't know that there is. Now you can look at this as humans, like a negative group of humans could make a deal with another planet, but then that doesn't mean we're all bad, right? That doesn't mean we're all in agreement with the agreement that was made or the treaty that was signed with the other planet. So we have to kind of put ourselves in their shoes. But I just want to bring this to everyone's attention. There's going to be a lot of overlap here. There's some people that are adamant that say the Ebens from the Serpo mission and that planet in Zeta Reticuli are not the same Greys that we signed a treaty with. Others argue that's not the case. On the left, this is a photo from the book. Is this J-Rod? This would be the 1947 Roswell crash survivor. This is from Alien Species, Advanced Humans, Greys, and Reptilians by Alton Parrish, 10/12/12 on beforeitsnews.com. So this could be a leaked photo. We don't know, but according to descriptions of J-Rod, the lone survivor, it seems he was very malnourished. He had a caved-in nose. This fits the description. Could be a real photo. On the right, this is a sculpture of a reticulan believed to be identical to an Eben by Hollywood artist Alan Levine. I just wanted to provide those as visuals for you guys. And this is from the Serpo book. Aaron, if you'd like to read this talks about MJ12 and the Eisenhower information.
It seems likely that MJ12 probably bowed to the wishes of the military and the CIA not to allow the DIA to get their hands on that program. They knew that if Kennedy had been given that information, he would almost certainly have complicated matters by trying to involve his intelligence organization and to take over a mature operation already well advanced over the last 9 years. Thus began the era of limited presidential access to top secret affairs. From the point of that first precedent, MJ-12 controlled all interaction with the aliens and gave the president only the information that, in their judgment, he had a need to know. President Eisenhower was the last president to be fully informed about our dealings with extraterrestrials, and there's reason to believe that even he was not told everything. And let me add on to that, and I actually talk about this in my book, if for those of you that have read it. Eisenhower actually clearly did not know everything, was kept out of a lot, and he found out about it, and he tried to get access to just Area 51 because he knew there's all this super advanced technology going on there, and reverse engineering of ET craft and all kinds of stuff going on there, and ETs themselves. And he tried to get access to it, and he was denied access. He was blatantly told, you do not have jurisdiction over what we're doing in Area 51. And he was furious because he's like, I'm the president of the United States. How do I not have jurisdiction? And he threatened to send the First Army from Colorado there to invade the base and take over if you don't grant me access. So what they did was they gave him a bullshit, like they let him see a few little things there, and clearly not everything, just a tiny bit, and that was it. But he found out that the military industrial complex has gone way off the rails with all this technology, and they're keeping it secret, and they're doing all these crazy things behind the scenes with no accountability whatsoever from anything, let alone the government or him. So hence his famous speech, beware the military industrial complex. If you look at that speech, you can tell he's saying what he can say to try to warn people about this deep state and what they've done with this kind of breakaway stuff, and all in secret. So
Right.
Eisenhower did not know everything at all. Trust me. He knew what was happening generally, but he was kept out of the loop on most of it.
Right. Well said. And like this says here, they knew that if Kennedy had been given that information, he would almost certainly have complicated matters by trying to involve his intelligence organization.
Mhm.
So Kennedy created the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he did that strictly because he was trying to make it an umbrella organization to bring all the three-letter agencies together. So there was no more secrecy. Well, obviously they didn't like that, and that was one of the main reasons he was killed, among many
Right.
other reasons. But
And
we're going to get
also
into
look at the speeches Kennedy gave. You can see again, he's trying to warn people. He's saying we oppose
Right.
secrecy and secret oaths and secret proceedings, secret
So
societies. He knew what was happening. He's trying to warn people.
right. So if Eisenhower knew a lot, Kennedy knew a lot, but he knew less.
Right.
And we're going to get into the Kennedy directive. He's the president immediately following Eisenhower. And this is a quote from Kennedy. Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it, and the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. So he was clearly interested in this stuff, and it was a passion of his to explore space and other planets and get and share this information with the public and have full transparency. So this talks about the DIA being an umbrella agency created by Kennedy. And it would be fair to conclude that these military intelligence agencies were not very happy about having to turn this information over to a brand new intelligence agency created by a new young Democratic president who planned to replace them by combining all of their functions under a single umbrella organization. Consequently, they were probably not very cooperative and may have provided incomplete information or possibly even disinformation about the era when Eisenhower was president. Most likely, they convinced MJ-12 itself not to share that intelligence with the DIA in the interest of compartmentalization. As it will be seen in Chapter 5, this is probably exactly what happened, since we now know that the EBEs did send another scout craft to Earth on May 20th, 1953, and that craft did not crash, it landed. Evidently, those messages that were sent in each 1953 must have been answered after all. But the DIA was not informed about this when the agency joined the project in 1962. So they're also talking about an entirely different EBEN landing that happened in 1953. Whether it was the EBENs or the Greys, that's up for debate, but it did happen. And here is the official document that's been declassified that literally talks about the landing. They call it a crash, but there's discrepancy. There's information on the website that says no, the crash was disinformation. It was actually a landing. So, regardless, we do know that something happened in 1953 and there was another meeting. And then this is just a photo of MJ12 and everyone involved, probably names we wouldn't recognize besides, James Forrestal. And I think Hynek, J. Allen Hynek, is not, he's not even on there, but I believe he might have been at some point involved. And
Later
another
on.
name, yeah, later on, and another
So,
name that's not.
oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, sorry, real quick. It's called MJ12 because it started out with these 12 people, but it grew to way more than 12 people. So, but it kept being called Majestic 12, or that's what people knew it as. But it's
Right.
if the same thing is still in existence today, I mean, it might just be, there's different things to it, but it's obviously
And
way more than 12 people now. And even like shortly after it was created, I think it grew to more than 12 people.
and and Majestic is just a security clearance.
Right.
That's all
Right.
that is. And Carl Sagan was also involved. And there's a really interesting part in this book, which we don't cover in the webinar, about Carl Sagan and his involvement and knowing of the Serpo mission. Yet he comes out publicly as this lead figure in the scientific community asking us, could there be life out there? Is there life on other planets? Like he's playing a role. He's literally being
Yeah.
paid or blackmailed not to talk.
And the debunker of all things UFO, like any
Yeah,
talk of like they're already here, these UFOs that were people are seeing are real. He would like debunk it. He would say, no, that's not real, blah blah blah. But
right.
secretly he knew a lot of this stuff. He was briefed on it, and he was very interested in UFOs, as you can actually see in his past, up to a point where all of a sudden the switch flips, and now he's a debunker publicly. Now he's, like Tyler said, could there be life?
Right.
Is there? I don't know. It's probably,
Um, we can't
eh,
we can't encourage you guys to read this book enough. There is so much we're leaving out. This book is so packed with
right.
information. You can't just sit down and read it and retain it all. There's just no way. I mean, it is every page is loaded with like mind blowers, and just a few pages on Carl Sagan alone are worth reading. But anyway,
Right.
let's continue for the sake of time. So this is the memorandum for the director of the Central Intelligence Agency from President Kennedy. And he was requesting the classification review of all UFO intelligence files affecting national security. Obviously, they did not like this because they knew Kennedy was a threat to their secrecy. And this letter was another reason he was assassinated, along with signing the directive for the Serpo mission, which we're going to learn about here in a minute, the EBEN exchange program, which was uh, solely Kennedy's idea. Maybe not solely his idea, but he was definitely on board with it.
Once the connection was made, the alien commenced sending messages to his planet. During the summer of 1952, he sent 6 messages, all of which were successfully transmitted. He was able to roughly translate the messages into English for the benefit of the Los Alamos scientists. Message number 1 notified his planet that he was still alive. Message number 2 told about the crash and the fact that all of his crew were killed upon impact. Message number 3 requested that a rescue craft be sent to Earth to pick him up. Message number 4, at the prompting of the scientists, the 4th message suggested that a formal meeting be arranged with Earth officials, who would of course be American. Message number 5, and then we are told by Anonymous that message 5 said that the United States government had requested an exchange program. Message number 6, finally, the 6th message gave the landing coordinates on Earth for any future visitation.
So in the original message, the message 5 was the birth of the EBEN exchange program. President Kennedy gave the official directive for the EBEN exchange program. The date for the alien landing had previously been set for April 24th, 1964, and the landing site was to be at the western border of Holloman Air Force Base, adjacent to the southern entrance to the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. It was originally planned to be only a diplomatic visit during which the aliens would also retrieve the bodies of the 9 dead victims of the 2 New Mexico crashes, as well as the body of EBE-1. But President Kennedy decided to request that the event become an exchange program. This request was communicated to the EBEN home planet and was approved by them around September 1962. So one of the things about the Serpo information even on the website, on the email thread, I should say, after Anonymous came forward with all this information, there were other people say, this is true. I can't believe that you're talking about this, but, and the buts were, you have all of it right, except for this, or this, including the number of people that went. Were there 2 women that went? No, there were 12 men, not 10 men and 2 women. The locations for some of the landing sites and stuff like that. So there's discrepancies in some of the details, but all in all, it seems that the mission absolutely happened. Project Serpo absolutely happened. There was an EBEN exchange program, but this is an example of the disinfo. So according to the discrepancies on the email thread itself. So President Kennedy gave the official directive for the EBEN exchange program. The date for the alien landing had been previously set for April 24th, 1964. The landing site was to be at the western border of the Holloman Air Force Base. Somebody else said, no, that's not true. The contact site wasn't Holloman. That was disinformation. It was the Trinity site. The Sakaro incident, Lonnie Zamora, April 24th, 1964, was where the aliens landed by mistake. And yes, JFK was very involved. That part is true, and perhaps one of the reasons he was killed. So there seems to be some subtle discrepancies in the information. And so some of the information that we're even sharing might not be entirely accurate. So it's important to take note of that, but we're just sharing what's available.
Anonymous tells us that President Kennedy issued the directive for the EBEN exchange program about 6 months into the planning for the return visit. That would have been around September 1962. That means that he was probably briefed on the EBEN Los Alamos communications history by MJ-12 around that time. As we noted earlier, the suggestion of an exchange program was first advanced in the 5th message to Serpo sent by EBE-1 in 1952 at the urging of the aliens' military handlers, but presumably ultimately at the prompting of President Eisenhower. So this idea did not originate with Kennedy. In fact, he may have been persuaded to push this agenda by MJ-12. And that explains how the DIA came to be involved in the operation. Certainly, Kennedy would have wanted his new intelligence agency firmly under the control of himself and Robert.
They were confident of the success of the mission because by the time President Kennedy had been given the directive for the exchange program in 1962, the military had already been secretly dealing directly with the EBEs right here on Earth in a reverse engineering program to duplicate their anti-gravity disk for 9 years. So this had already been going on for 9 years before the Kennedy directive and the Serpo mission. By 1962, the CIA and the NSA had volumes of intelligence about the EBEs. We knew all about their history and their character and had already established a working diplomatic relationship with their civilization. Furthermore, we were assured of their good intentions because they had given us as a gift an anti-gravity disk to use as a prototype supported by EBEN scientists to help implement our reverse engineering program. So there were EBEs, ETs, working alongside our government and these underground bases like Area 51, reverse engineering this craft. And after President Kennedy was assassinated, President Lyndon B. Johnson was read in on the Serpo mission, according to the book. And we find out he would be the last president to be read in on any of this ET stuff because they understood how much of a problem and more or less of a nuisance it was for the shadow government, for lack of a better term, getting the president and politics involved. It was much easier for them to do what they needed to do without having to go through the chain of command. And President Lyndon Johnson was the 36th president. So basically, it was like Kennedy passing the torch. The message told us that the 2 EBEN spaceships were already on their way and would arrive on schedule We learned later that the journey took about 10 months, so that means that the EBEN spacecraft had been en route from Serpo for about 6 months of Earth time when the message was received. President Kennedy had been assassinated only a few weeks earlier, and the entire nation was still in mourning at that point. Some of the DIA project coordinators wanted to cancel the exchange program. The fate of the mission was then left to President Lyndon B. Johnson. He was briefed by the mission planners and made the decision to continue with the exchange, although we are told in a side note by Anonymous that the president didn't really believe it would happen. It is interesting to note that apparently President Kennedy had not informed then Vice President Johnson about Project Crystal Knight. This is surprising because Johnson had been appointed by Kennedy to be the head of Space Council, the head of the Space Council. Evidently, Kennedy had been told by MJ-12 that the project information could not be shared with Johnson or with the president's cabinet.
Even by the time Kennedy was president, it was already, there was already secrecy, in my opinion. That probably just furthered it, I would say, even deeper.
Yeah.
But it was already with Eisenhower in the early 50s, and even you could make an argument even with Truman before Eisenhower, it was already there. Right. Going back to Roswell in 47, which was Truman. So before Kennedy was even president, the president was already many levels below the highest clearance level. So today you have insiders saying the president is like 35 levels below the top. Like there's at least 35 levels of clearance above the president. So they're like way, way, way down the food chain, and everything's need to know. And like you said, they now view presidents as more of a nuisance and just a necessary puppet to have out there for the people, whereas they're doing all the real stuff in the background, and they just need somebody to kind of hold that place. Well, in my opinion, though, it's still important because the people, they need one of their guys now. Up until Trump, they for many years they had one of their guys as the president, or at least a puppet they could control, that could implement their agendas, say what they wanted to say, get the people to believe what they want them to believe, blah blah blah. Well, then you got Trump in there, and he's like throwing a wrench into that. That's why he was attacked so viciously. They just tried to take him out yesterday, because he is a huge wrench in the works of what they need. And the UFO and the ET aspect is one of the biggest aspects of the secrecy that they don't want out there.
So there's almost no mention of Nixon, Ford, and Carter,
right?
The three following presidents after Lyndon B. Johnson, in the book. It was decided that they're just not going to be read in. Maybe they're told the bare minimum of what they needed to know, but that was it. I would say that these guys might have been completely unaware of some of the happenings. Maybe not, maybe so. But
they're unaware, and any from insiders that have said any presidents that if they try to push too hard, they're threatened so ruthlessly that they basically understand, okay, I won't do it. They threaten them, their families. They say we'll leak all of the dirt we have on you, everything you can think of, right?
But the only other president I think that probably knew something was Obama. It seems like he would definitely have been read in. He knew about, I mean, if Andrew Basiago's testimony is true about being on Mars with Obama, and we have to consider the fact that he's very well aware of a lot more than probably the other presidents. But
absolutely,
let's move on.
But he was threatened as well, and there's actually insiders that have talked about how much he was threatened and told, if you speak a word.
Right. Allegedly, he was threatened like right after he got inaugurated, like immediately after.
Yeah, supposedly, actually, Bush Sr. is one of the people that threatened him, and
right.
So, but he already knew, I think, at that point, like how this deep state operated, and he knew he was stuck in that system, And not saying he's a good guy, I don't agree with that either, but he was still stuck in that system, that he was a puppet, couldn't.
Well, now that I think about it, actually, Obama and the presidents prior to him probably knew more than these guys, because they might have very well been reptilians themselves, or reptilian consciousness at least. So
as William Tompkins said himself, right?
Right. So anyway, let's move on. So Reagan, for whatever reason, Reagan showed interest, and it was decided that Reagan would be briefed on the Serpo mission. And this book, we did not include it because it's too long of a briefing, but it has verbatim, word for word, the conversation that took place between somebody they call the caretaker and President Reagan. And it's a briefing that happened in 1981, the year he became president. And he was fully read in on the Serpo mission. And this is more proof that Reagan knew. So if Reagan was read in and briefed in 1981, then in 1982, there was a White House special screening of the movie E.T. prior to public release that President Reagan sat in on. And this is what Steven Spielberg had to say about the special screening and
about what Reagan said at the end of the movie. He stood up and said this out loud to everyone there. And this is Steven Spielberg himself saying this. So he's confirming this is real.
I was there.
You were there? Okay, so is it the story that I heard was that when Reagan saw it, he started talking about how close to reality it was, and he was quickly ushered out of the room. Is that true?
No, he wasn't ushered out of the room. He was the President of the United States. Nobody could usher Ronald Reagan out of the room. It was in the White House screening room.
Yeah.
And Reagan got up to thank me for bringing the film to show him, to show the President, the First Lady, and all of their guests, which included Sandra Day O'Connor in her first week as a justice of the Supreme Court, and it included some astronauts. I think Neil Armstrong was there. I'm not 100% certain, but it was an amazing evening, and he just stood up and he looked around the room almost like he was doing a head count, and he said, "I want to thank you for bringing E.T. to the White House. We really enjoyed your movie." And then he looked around the room and he said, "And there are a number of people in this room who know that everything on that screen is absolutely true." And he said it without smiling. But he said that, and everybody laughed. By the way, the whole room laughed because he presented it like a joke, but he wasn't smiling as he said it.
Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, that to me is amazing testimony.
And Steven Spielberg goes on to say he just assumes, he thinks Reagan was joking, and whether he actually thinks that or not, that's what he's saying in this interview. But he's even saying he said it without smiling. Does that sound like he's joking to you? Like, is that how someone would say that if they're joking? Like the president would say that without smiling? Like, no, he's saying everything you watch there is absolutely real and true.
Right. So again, the Reagan briefing was in March of 1981, according to the information available. The screening of E.T. was in 1982, prior to its official release in June 11th. So it all lines up. He would have had the knowledge to stand up in that room and make that statement, having been briefed. So it makes sense.
Yep, checks out.
And then we're going to get into the Serpo mission now and how they selected the team. And this is a really, really juicy part of the whole thing. So we'll just go ahead and play this.
What really shocked you the most, besides you not knowing about it?
Well, what shocked me was how they selected the astronauts.
How did they?
Well, they selected. It took them months and months and months, but they got people they had to get specialists,
right?
The doctors and other specialists. But they went out and found people within the military that were orphans and didn't have any family members and weren't married. Now that's a difficult task, even in 1960, and this is when this was occurring. But they found him. They found, I think, 100 or so, and they narrowed it down. Right. They put these astronauts through an enormous amount of training. In reading and then listening to a tape recording later of all the training they went through, Special Forces SEALs wouldn't even gone through this kind of stuff. But they had to prepare them for a journey from Earth, 39 light years away, to a foreign planet. How do you prepare somebody for that?
Right.
Well, they tried it and they did it. I mean, they according to them, they did it. And that was the most fascinating thing, how they chose the 12. Now, the controversy is, according to him, there were 12 men. According to this other person that became involved later, said, no, there were 10 men and 2 women. There were 2 women that went. One was a linguist. She learned the Eben language. So there was some controversy there whether there were two women or not two women. But anyways, they were trained. They were set up to go on a mission. And the EBEs were supposed to come in 1964 to White Sands and Holloman Air Force Base. But that kind of blew up because the one EBEn craft didn't land at Holloman. It landed near Socorro. And that was the Lonnie Zamora incident in 1964. When they eventually found the right landing space in White Sands, it was decided that the EBEs weren't ready for it. So then they scheduled it for 1965, and they were going to leave out of Groom Lake, Area 51. And the craft, huge craft, landed. About 40 tons of material that we brought on with us, the EBEs took, and they went on their voyage, the 12 to Serpo.
Did we have any of their races stay back?
We had an exchange program. One ET stayed, EBEn 2 they called him. EBEn 2 stayed, and the R12 went. And we had the communications device that we could still communicate with our people on Serpo. We were communicating with them, I think, once every 7 months or something like that. It took like 40 hours for the signal to get back, something to that effect. But we still communicated with them. And they eventually adjusted to the life on Serpo. One of the problems they had up there was there was two suns. There's a binary planet. So there was never any darkness. There was always daylight.
Yes, and I recommend everyone, if you have a subscription to Gaia, go and watch this full interview. It's really, really, really valuable information.
Yeah, it is.
And so there's somebody who, I don't know who, but there's an artist who either created this or used AI art to create a whole bunch of images from the Serpo mission, or at least close depictions from what was described in the book. And this is just astronauts on another planet with two suns. But what's even more exciting, in the book, they show this picture, and it just says the two suns of Serpo with no context. For all we know, we could be looking at an original photo, a real photo of Serpo. There was hundreds, thousands of photos taken that were, in this vault apparently, but who's to say one or two didn't slip out, get leaked, and end up in this book?
That looks like a real photo, assuming. Right. Obviously, it looks like two suns there. It looks like a real photo. So obviously, there's Photoshop or there's whatever. You could make the argument, but
right.
Who's to say? Like you said, that's not a real photo. But, I would bank on that.
And this matches the description in the book that one sun was much brighter than the other.
And there you go. Right.
Yeah. And each sun had different rotations. There's a lot of information about the two suns, but either way, just take a look at this photo. It's in the book. If you want to purchase the book, you can take a closer look at it. So selecting a team. Now in 1962, when communications were much improved, Kennedy realized that the exchange request might now receive an approval. And it did. It was agreed that we would send 12 American astronauts to the alien planet, and they would leave one EBEn ambassador here for a period of 10 years. Since the planned date of the landing could not be changed without great difficulty, that meant that the government planners had only about 18 months in which to select and train our ambassadorial team. It was a very tight schedule for such an unprecedented and complicated program. The selection process alone could easily involve a 6-month effort. While President Kennedy had placed the entire program in the hands of the Defense Intelligence Agency, this did not preclude the use of civilian subcontracting agencies. However, it was quickly decided that the Air Force would be the lead agency taking responsibility for finding 12 volunteers for this historic mission. The call for volunteers was placed in military publications. Eventually, after some months, the final 10 men and 2 women were chosen. There were 8 Air Force selectees, 2 Army and 2 Navy. Additionally, 4 alternates were picked. Now that's important. 4 alternates were picked. They would go through the same training as the main team. In case a trainee was eliminated or dropped out, these 16 were the very best and most likely to complete the mission successfully. There's that number 16 that William Cooper was talking about. So if he had information that 16 men were selected, that's very true. 16 were selected, but 4 were selected as alternates in case something happened to one of the other ones. So that's, to me, corroborating information that William Cooper was, in fact, talking about the Serpo mission. And then this was the actual advertisement that was sent out to the military for people that wanted to go on this expedition. If you would like to read this, Aaron.
The advertisement, which was sent out, asked anyone interested in volunteering for a space program to apply. It was a semi-classified announcement. The disguise was that the U.S. Air Force was selecting a special team to travel to the moon, and these people must undergo special training and a special selection process. None of the military people trying out for this team knew the real mission. About 500 people applied, and that narrowed down to about 160. But there was a problem. Some specialists required on this mission were missing. Besides, the requirement called for each team member to be single, never married, no children, and if possible, orphans. The U.S. Air Force had to go out and recruit 2 doctors and several other specialists.
Right. I just think it's interesting. That's how it was presented, that they were going to the moon. So even when they signed up, they really didn't know what they were signing up for.
Exactly. I mean, of course, because it's such a highly classified thing, they're not going to tell everyone who's what it actually is until the very, very end.
And it's kind of sad what happens next. The selection committee decided to completely dissolve the identities of all the team members and to assign them 3-digit numbers as their new identities. They wanted to sever all their existing connections to Earth, except those with the mission personnel, and that meant destroying traceable identities. Consequently, they were all sheep-dipped. It was finally decided that they would be shown on their official military records as missing, which there's a whole couple pages about just this alone, which it would just take way too long to get into all the details. But sheep-dip is a real term according to Wikipedia, means a military and clandestine services term for feigning non-involvement by having staff officially disaffiliate and operate ostensibly independently. So, I mean, they were sheep-dipped. They were stripped of their identities. And I'm just going to skip this because this is just rehashing the fact that, well, actually what this is, I'll explain it. This is a counter email to the original email saying, no, there were 12 men. There weren't 10 men and 2 women. That part was wrong. So this is the guy verifying that Serpo actually happened, but he's saying that there were no women that went. And this is a major discrepancy among many people, just depending on whose information you believe. It does seem to lean more towards like there's 2 women that went. Everything's so compartmentalized, not people might be sharing what their knowledge was and what they thought they knew, but who knows. And then several team members, pilots, were trained on flying an EBE craft, one of which was captured near western New Mexico in 1949. The plan called for these selected few to fly the craft back to Earth in case of an emergency. So this was an emergency escape contingency. Therefore, there were 4 pilots on the team, 102, 203, 225, and 308. These 4 spent many weeks at the Nevada complex learning to fly the recovered EBE alien craft. It wasn't hard to fly once one could understand the operation of controls. I'm sure many of the UFO sightings back in 1964-65 around the West could be attributed to these test flights by our team members. And then this is a clip from that roundtable discussing this very thing.
One thing that's interesting I want to go back to, we talked early on about the EBE craft and how they may have operated, and the telepathic potential the potential telepathic link to the control system. But one thing that is stated in the book is that military personnel were trained to fly EBE craft. So there was at least a version of the EBE craft that human beings were capable of piloting with standard controls. Whether that's a different version that they set us up with or what. But it specifically says in the book they were trained to pilot this thing in the event that the EBEs became hostile and they needed to escape. So that raises additional questions as well. Did they teach us to fly the craft? Did we figure it out on our own? I don't know. But again, it's one of the interesting components of this case that's
And that ties back too to, I mean, we've heard testimony from even young abductees and children who claim to interact with the craft and learn to fly it at an early age. I've heard this through many circles, right? S4, they're trained to interface with the craft themselves. So that kind of ties back to that.
It does.
Just an interesting little side note there.
Prisoners. As the landing date approached, the team was ready and idle and probably enjoying some well-deserved rest and recreation, although they remained under surveillance the whole time. Their training had been completed and they had been given a 15-day vacation. And the time just before the April landing date, they were sent back to Fort Leavenworth in Kansas and were confined in locked cells in the U.S. disciplinary barracks and kept under close watch. This reflected the almost fanatical dedication to secrecy by the planning committee. They were simply not taking any chances, no matter how remote that information about the impending mission might be revealed. One can easily appreciate how depressed the team must have been to have been treated like criminals on the eve of what should have been a grand send-off on a historically momentous and extraordinary journey to the stars.
Right. So I just put this in here to show the condition that, they were locked in cells. They were at a disciplinary barracks and kept under close watch. They had no contact with the outside world, and the trip was delayed, which delayed their sentence essentially until they got to leave. So, these people sacrificed a lot, and then, they came back and with radiation poisoning, and all of them are dead now, which we'll get into that in more details. But it's just ridiculous. I mean, what they were doing to these people. I know it's all under the guise of national security, but it's really, they were looking for technology that they could weaponize and use in war scenarios and gain an upper hand on the other countries or whatever the case may be,
Right. Which again shows you the nature of the people that are running the systems in our institutions. I mean, they do not really care about humanity. All they care about is power, control, war, and that's it. And that's why they're so hell-bent on the secrecy, because the last thing that would destroy all that is for this information to get out, and knowledge of, especially of the advanced technology, to get out, which destroys their whole system. So anyways.
Right. And then here's that number 16 again. So departing Earth, the greeting party. The greeting group consisted of 16 senior government and military officials. Anonymous does not give the identities of these people, but most probably President Johnson was not among them. The 12 team members waited in a bus nearby. 45 tons of supplies and equipment stood ready to load onto the alien ship. And the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind also shows the 12 team members on a bus, which is another interesting connection. The EBEs, so this is just the delayed flight. I guess I'll read through this, even though we kind of already covered it. The EBEs informed us at that time that they had reconsidered the timing of the exchange program and wished to reschedule it for a later date. They preferred to only retrieve the bodies of their dead compatriots on this trip and return to Earth in July 1965 to accomplish the exchange of personnel. This poses an enormous logistical problem for us, since all the equipment and supplies would now have to be warehoused somewhere, and we would have to keep the team motivated in a highly secure facility for another year. There were also possible political ramifications that could change our willingness to continue with the program if the Johnson administration decided to cancel it. The aliens took the body of the 9 EBEs who had died in the 2 Roswell crashes, as well as the body of EBE 1 on board. We had performed autopsies on some of the bodies. The remains had been kept at Los Alamos laboratories in a special state-of-the-art cryogenic facility. The visit lasted about 4 hours. The film and audio recordings of the entire event have been stored in a vault at Bolling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. So there was a discrepancy on the time and the date and the place of the exchange program, the beginning of it. And the EBEs came in 1964, not ready to receive our personnel, but only to take their 9 dead compatriots back. So we had to wait an entire year the team that had already been locked up and in a cell waiting for this trip had to wait another year. And it does explain what they did for that year. And ultimately, it was kind of a blessing that they had another year to prepare because they were much more prepared for the second time around.
The two EBEN shuttles returned right on schedule on July 16th, 1965. This time they landed at the northern section of the Nevada test site as planned. The diplomatic niceties having been attended to in their previous visit, this was strictly a working meeting. The 12 team members waited in a bus as before, and the military vans were poised to unload their massive cargo consisting of 90,500 pounds of supplies, equipment, and vehicles. The team boarded the EBEN shuttlecraft, and the cargo was loaded by military personnel onto one of the craft. The massive size of this ship can be appreciated when we learn that the entire cargo fit into a single level of the 3-level craft. So that's how big this craft was. The lone EBEN ambassador disembarked from the shuttle and was taken away in a military vehicle. He was then sent to the alien facility at Los Alamos Laboratories. So the exchange here seems pretty uneven, right? So we only get one EBEN, and they get 16. I mean, 16 people went. Not all
Right.
that. Only a few stayed, or a couple stayed, but 16-1. That's it. That was the exchange.
If that's accurate,
If
because
that's accurate.
like William Cooper said, 16 went, 16 stayed, basically. That doesn't mean that's what happened. Maybe we only did get one, at least in this instance, because
Right.
it probably wasn't up to us. But,
Right.
I'm sure they were calling the shots. So
I mean, you're dealing with a much more advanced race. It's a miracle that they did this at all, really, because, they clearly have
right.
the upper hand in every facet. So, yeah, like you said, we were probably grateful just to get one,
So we're gonna get into the direct to the diary, the actual commander's diary from the mission. In the book, there's a section where you're reading exactly what he wrote while he was there, writing in his diary on the way to Serpo, while he was there, and on the way back. And this just prefaces that. Attached for your UFO thread list are just 4 pages of the team commander's diary. The diary contains a large number of pages, all handwritten. It took me several days to prepare the attached 4 pages from the diary. This is the actual verbatim diary of the team commander. It was started the morning of the departure. There were code names for control personnel and 3-digit numbers for each team member addressed above. There are other codes and abbreviations for certain things, which is not explained. I've typed the exact words, phrases, and abbreviations. Nothing has been changed. And likewise, I will ask you not to alter, change, or correct any of the text here as you often do with some of mine to make it grammatically correct. This includes your use of caps to emphasize things I've written. I ask you to not do this with these journal entries, Victor. So this was from Anonymous to Victor Martinez on the email thread, sharing with him, prefacing the diary. And we're going to read the exact 2 original diary entries, and that's all we're going to read of, because there's tons of them. There's actually over 3,000 diary entries, but we're just going to read the first 2 just so you can get a feel for how this guy was documenting the trip and what they were experiencing right off the bat. And Aaron, you can read the first one and I'll read the second one if you're okay with that.
Sure. Day 1, entry 1. We are ready. Hard to think we finally made it. Team is motivated and calm. Final briefing by MTC and MTB. Cargo packed in EBE craft. Might have some problems with guns. We'll be talking to the MVC 899, the security officer, and 203, the assistant team commander. Will have overall charge of weapons. No sync system, or we don't know about them. Everything moving smoothly. 774. The doctors will give each member final check before boarding. Okay, we loaded everything and it fits, but we have to transfer all of it to the bigger ship once we get to rendezvous point. Really excited about this. No reservations by anyone. MTC asked all members to make final decision. The team all said go. We go. Interior of EBE craft is big. There are 3 levels. This is different than the one we trained on. I think that was a scout craft. This one is a shuttle craft. We stored the cargo in lower level. We will sit in the center level and the crew will sit in the upper level. Strange looking walls. They seem to be dimensional. There are 3 stations. 4 of us will sit in each station. No seats, just benches. We wouldn't fit in those small crew seats. The MVC says we don't need anything special. No O2 or helmets. Don't know what to do with them. Okay, final checks. MC gave us final words. One prayer said, we board the BE craft. 475, linguist number 2, really nervous. 700 will watch him. The hatch is closed. No windows. We can't see out. Everyone is seated in their respective seats on the bench. No retention harnesses. Okay, well, bar across us. The craft is starting engine, or what they call energy thrusters. Seems like we are moving, but nothing is happening inside. Still able to write this. Really dizzy now. 102 sitting next to me, and he is faint. Something feels really funny. Have to rewrite this because I can't think straight.
Day 1, entry 2. We made it to the rendezvous craft. We don't know where we are, but it seemed like we all fainted or were really confused during this trip. According to my wristwatch, it took about 6 hours or maybe more. We left at 13:25 and it is 19:39, but not sure of the day. We flew into the big ship. We are standing by in a bay or something. There are many EBEs helping us. They seem to understand we are confused. The cargo was offloaded in one big move. Take note of that. The platform containing the cargo was moved without unloading the individual cargo. This ship looks like the inside of a real big building. The ceiling is about 100 feet high in this area of the ship. Okay, we are being moved into another part of the ship. Okay, we moved to another room or area. What a big ship. I just can't describe how big this is. It took us about 15 minutes to walk to our area. Seems like it is something special for us. The chairs are bigger, but there are only 10 of them. Okay, I guess 2 or 3 of myself will sit in a different location above these seats. We are moved by some sort of elevator, but I can't understand how it worked. Everyone is hungry. We have our backpacks containing some sea rats, their rations, and I guess we eat now. But must ask the MVC. I can't find him, and we can't communicate with the 2 EBEs here. They seem to be real nice. 420, linguist 1 will try to use his language skills. Almost funny. Sounds like a screaming match. We just had to use sign language indicating we want to eat. One of the EBEs brought us a container with something in it. Doesn't look good, but I think it is their food. Looks like mush or oatmeal. $8.99 will taste it. Well, $8.99 said it tastes like paper. Think we will all stick to our sea rats. Okay, MVC finally showed up. Told us we will begin the trip soon. 2 Milsey, that's not a typo either. 2 Milsey thinks he means 2 minutes, but don't really know. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to eat before leaving. We don't feel any weightlessness and we don't feel dizzy, but we don't know what to expect from this point on. They are indicating we must sit in the chairs. So this, just to give you guys an idea of what these journal entries look like, they're not really well written. It's just as if somebody's taking notes and writing a diary. So you really have to sit there and sift through them all, but it's incredible information. And that's why I urge everyone to read the book, because there is just so much. We would be here for hours and hours reading this all to you. But
right. So let me just say real quick. To me, that's another aspect of this that points to the fact that it's real. Because if this is fake, if this is all made up, they went to a ton of effort and time and effort to make it seem real by doing all these journal entries and all this stuff. Because does that really make sense to anyone that they would waste? Like, no, to me that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would they make over 3,000 journal entries for a made up story, psyop story?
And once you read it, like the information that's relayed and documented, it's not something that people would make up. I know we all have great imaginations, but once you hear some of the specific details, it's just things you would never think of occurring on an alien planet. But
so much detail. They wouldn't go. It just doesn't lie unless this is real. Like, the only explanation to me is that this is all real.
So anyway, moving on, I took note of this because I found it interesting. We learn from this that the EBEs have obviously developed a type of anti-gravity technology that allows them to cancel out the weight of massive objects so they can be easily pushed into another position. There is no other explanation for how they were able to offload 45 tons of equipment from the shuttle to the craft to the mothership so quickly and effortlessly. The diary tells us that this was done in one big move without taking the individual items off the platform. So that means the platform itself was moved. So they had the technology to make 45 tons of equipment weightless and to move it all onto the mothership in one big move. I mean, if that doesn't explain a lot of the technology of the ancient builder race and other things that we see with megalithic structures on this planet, then obviously they just have knowledge of some sort of acoustic or anti-gravity tech. And I found this interesting specifically because of what they're talking about with time here. Negative matter versus positive matter. Okay, NBC Eben finally arrived. He explains in broken English that we are halfway to the home planet. Everything is functioning properly, and we will all feel better once the craft gets out of this time wave, as he calls it. NBC says we can walk around any part of the ship, but we must stay together. We must be shown how to operate the movement centers. We are thinking he is referring to the elevators. It seems simple, just placing your hand over one of the operating lights, white and red. White moves it and red stops it. We hear some type of ringing sound, but NBC says it's only space sounds, whatever he means by that. Crew could only walk around when not in time wave. Any attempts to do so in time domain resulted in illness. So what we think is happening here is they were jumping through wormholes. They were like portal hopping essentially to get from Earth to their even home planet. And while they were in the wormhole, the team had to sit in these specially made chairs, which we'll get into in a minute. And if they weren't in those chairs, and if they weren't eating what the EBEs were giving them, they got violently ill. They got very sick. Even though the EBEs had this blue light technology that they would just come in and like put on their forehead, and it made them feel instantly better. They called it space sick, like car sick, but they called it space sick.
And that actually, I'm just now thinking of this. So Barry Littleton talks about when his experience of going on a craft where he started feeling sick, and his term he calls it is temporal aphasia, where he thinks it has something to do with a different a time anomaly, and he calls it temporal aphasia. And he literally says he starts feeling sick, lightheaded, and now we have in this that corroborates exactly with this right here. So there you go.
And it's not my speculation that they're portal hopping. They do explain that in the book. They travel through wormholes and specific destinations. It's not like they could just go one straight shot there. That's why it took 10 months or whatever it took to get to the planet. There's a lot more information, and like I said, in the books and in the email thread, if you have any questions and you really want to know more about this, I guarantee your questions are probably answered. We are literally just giving you the Cliff Notes version of all this.
Yeah, highly recommend just picking up the book Secret Journey to Planet Serpo by Len Kasten, and you can read the whole story in detail in the book.
So the death of 308. So actually one of the crew members died on the way to the planet.
The following entry in the team commander's diary was evidently written as they were nearing the end of the journey. Apparently they all slept through most of the journey, and each time they woke up, they had little or no memory of what had previously transpired. We learned later that 308, team pilot number 2, died of a pulmonary embolism. EBE 1 came back and led me to 308. He was in bowl, something like a coffin. 700 and 754 will examine 308. EBE 1 cautioned us not to take 308 out. Don't understand the caution. 774 is here. I tried to tell EBE 1 that these guys are our doctors and must examine 308. EBE 1 said no because of infection. I guess 308 must have had some sort of infection and it could be contagious. But is 308 dead? Don't know. We will take EBE 1 advice.
So he's writing as they're discovering, basically they woke up and discovered one of the team members was missing. And this is just a brief segment of that journal entry that he's talking about. And at this point, they don't even know that he's actually dead yet. And then this is Richard Doty talking about body of 308.
But one of the things interesting in this report was that the body of the American that died was taken into this building, and eventually this mediator allowed negotiated two of the Americans, the commander and the assistant commander, to go into this building to get the body, and they were going to bury the body. And they saw all these vats, and you know, they were asking the interpreter, "What are these vats?" And when they got up, that American was in one of these vats. He said, "We're cloning races."
Amazing. Were there other races there, Rick, that they were exposed to besides aliens?
According to the commander, there was many different races that they were cloning. They were doing biological experiments on all of them, and that's what really upset the commander. He said, "You're not going to do that on my crew member's body," but it's something like a formal procedure that the EBEs do. Right. One of our people die, we do the same thing. Mm-hmm. But you know, the head EBEN said, "Okay, if you don't want it, then you can take the body and we'll have a burial." And they did burial for him.
So I know we kind of jumped ahead in the story there, but just because this is the only part where Richard Doty's talking about the dead body, we will get into the cloning facility a little bit here down the road, but it's super fascinating when they do discover the cloning facility on the planet. Either way, there was a major confrontation actually when they had to really fight to get their crew member's body back, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And just things to note about the journey there. The crew was dizzy and very sick almost the whole time, because we only covered a very, very small portion of the actual journey there. But they were very sick and dizzy most of the time. They weren't following the rules because they hated sitting in those blue spheres, those glass spheres, I mean. It was just like being in a prison cell, and so when they got out and tried to walk around, they would get really sick and have to sit back in them. They didn't like the taste of the EBEN food because it was just tasted like paper. So they were eating their rations, but apparently the EBEN food would help them with the sickness. Like this says here, food is nasty, tastes like paper, resort to sea rats. EBEN food seems to help with travel sickness. The crew had to stay in glass spheres while in the time domain, like I just explained. The red lights indicate when to sit in the sphere, and the white light means we are okay. That means when the light was white, they could walk around. When it was red, they had to get in their sphere. They had no concept of time or day. The room seems to be made specifically for the crew. Water is milky and tastes like apples. Just a fun side note. There's no stars, just lines and waves. So they were never, when they were able to see out the window, they couldn't see any stars, which corroborates with Zaysan, the Plagiarin diaries.
Yep.
Whenever he thought they were in space, and they were like, "No, we're just in the upper atmosphere. If we were in space, you wouldn't be able to see the stars." And they explained because there's no atmosphere to filter the light, essentially, to act as like a lens for to act as a lens for the light to travel through. Because once you're in space, the distance is so far that light actually isn't traveling because there's no lens for it to travel through. Anyway, it just aligns with that. And yeah, the crew can't remember recent events. They slept a lot. So they had a very difficult time remembering anything on the trip besides, he would diary immediately, but they weren't retaining their memories. There was brain fog most of the time. So just some interesting things. And this is the artist's depiction of them in the spheres. How accurate that is, probably not, but still gives you a visual. And then this is the artist's depiction of the bridge, which kind of is accurate. This is the way it's described in tiers like that. And like they said, the head Ebe was at the top. I mean, I'm sure this isn't entirely accurate, but still.
Arrival. We see two suns. The ground is dirt. Looking up, I see blue skies. The sky is very clear. We see two suns, one brighter than the other. The landscape looks like a desert, Arizona or New Mexico. No vegetation that we can see. There are rolling hills, but nothing but dirt. This must be the central village or town. We landed in an open area with large structures like electrical towers. Something is sitting on top of these towers. The mirrored tower. On the center of the village is a large tower. Looks like a concrete structure. Very large, maybe 300 feet. Looks like a mirror is placed on top of this tower. All the buildings look like adobe or mud huts. Some are larger than others. Looking in one direction, can't tell any actual compass readings, but there's a very large structure.
Okay, so at this point, I realized that there's no way we can cover what the book was about to cover, these journal entries. So there's just no way. So unfortunately, we are literally going to give you the Cliff Notes version of their experience on the planet. Otherwise, we would be here forever. But I did take, so the book was broken up into sections. So I did bullet point all of the book sections. So you know at least what's in the book, and it kind of gives you a chronological order of how this is all happening. So welcome to the planet Serpo. They all look alike, where they explain basically all the EBEs look alike, but they learn how to identify them by their voices and personalities. Um, Maybe they have books about Earth, and then we are the aliens. They quickly realize that they were the aliens, the humans. We were the aliens on their planet, and it was so interesting to them because we saw them as the aliens, but it was the exact opposite way, right? And the one thing that I will add about them saying maybe they have books on Earth is apparently the EBEs had concluded that we were still in the scientific dark ages and they weren't interested in anything that we had to teach them. That's from one of the journal entries, but they were trying to teach the EBEn scientists about our science and our physics and everything. And they had concluded that we were in the dark ages. So they knew so much about Earth already. They had wondered if they had books about Earth, or they had just, the EBEs claimed that they had been surveilling Earth for like 2 or 3 thousand years. So they had pretty much gathered what we were capable of and just decided that they were uninterested in anything that we had to teach them. So what they did allow them to do was teach the EBEn children Earth mathematics and simple Earth science just as an experiment, and it was a really interesting part of their stay. Adjustment. The planet must be over 140 degrees. They talk about the sundial tower, which is how the EBEs kept time. They had to start using EBEn time because none of their time devices would work on the planet at all. The clocks ran out of batteries. The watches wouldn't work with two suns. It was like a 43-hour day or something. It was just impossible. They literally lost track of Earth time. They talk about the EBEn food, the EBEn elimination, the body waste, confrontation. They took all 308's blood, Brave New World, EBEn genetic laboratory. I saw the dark side of the civilization. They get into the cloning facility where they saw a number of different genetic experiments taking place, including humans. They said creatures like things you would see in ancient Egypt, like humans with dog heads and just weird creatures that didn't make any sense. He asked where they got the creatures from, and they said they were abducted from other planets. And the EBEs couldn't lie, which actually I'll read this next part before I continue this part of the story. He says in one of the journal entries, I saw the dark side of the civilization. The EBEs are not the humane civilization we thought they were, but I must say they didn't hide anything. The doctors spoke straight to us, just like the EBEs. They don't know how to lie. Seeing what we saw will change our impression of the EBEs as long as we stay on this planet. Basically, they were abducting beings and animals from planets all over the galaxy or from wherever. And they asked if they were unaware or if the beings were aware of them being abducted or the planets. And they said no. They said most of the animals that they abduct are animals. They're not intelligent life, as we would consider intelligent life. So they were abducting animals like cattle, elk, deer, whatever they needed from other planets for their genetic experiments. But then there were humans and other intelligent looking beings, but they said none of those bodies were taken alive. They said they were all taken dead. So, it's all perspective on if any of this stuff is ethical or not, but they had a very, very advanced cloning facility. And you can only imagine that we took home some of that information with us and probably learned how to clone, or at least we probably already knew how to clone, and then this advanced our knowledge of that. A police state. So basically, they realized that this was a very militaristic planet, meaning that the Ebens didn't have much freedom. There was constant guards on patrol. They had very strict work schedules. It didn't seem like there was time for any creativity. They were allowed to play some games. They did have some free time, but it was a strictly controlled society. Like they called it a 1984 society. These are just more sections of the book. How do we exchange science? And Eben Einstein, there was one really smart Eben that actually hung out with the crew a lot.
They
There
called
was
him
efficient
Einstein.
yeah, they called him Einstein, yeah. Efficient manufacturing, the Eben government, a structured civilization. Like I said, 1984 society, strictly controlled. Feast, fun, and death. They talk about the Eben culture, Eben fun, ball games, and sex. Feast day. We had given up Earth time. The deaths of 899 and 754. Ebens did die. The Eben wake. Star Wars. Unfortunately, there's just not enough time to go into all of this, but it's all very, very fascinating. And this is just a depiction of the feast where they finally did get to have like one really good meal. They do go in great detail on how they grow their food, what kind of food they have. They do have fruits and vegetables. They did allow the crew members to hunt what they called the beast on the planet and eat the beast. The Ebens thought it was strange that the humans ate meat. They didn't eat meat. They thought it was very strange that we wanted to eat meat. So, exploration, history, and physical environment, which we're going to learn about the yellow book here in a second, where we learn about their history. They could travel as they wished across the planet. Exploration of Serpo, the move to quadrant 1, which we're going to hear about in a second, and then radiation. The radiation levels were off the charts, and that's why they all came back with radiation poisoning. But we're going to play this next video from Richard Doty, Cosmic Disclosure, where he talks about the move to quadrant 1.
So while you were in Joseph Yeager's, cellar, looking at all this information, you told me that there was actually pictures he had of the planet. Could you describe what you saw on these pictures?
The crew, the 12-person astronaut crew, took a lot of cameras with them, so they took a lot of photos. And he showed us pictures he didn't show us a lot, but he showed us some of the pictures of the crew when they arrived on Serpo, and pictures of the area that they stayed in for the first year or so. Pretty desert-like.
Desert-like?
It's pretty desert-like, but there was different areas of the planet that was less desert than where they had landed. That was a central, where they landed was a central home area of the Ebens. Over the next year, they realized that they were getting a lot of radiation, and the heat there was a tremendous amount of heat. So the Ebens decided to move them north. The northern part of the planet was cooler, a lot cooler. In fact, they actually had seen snow on that planet, which was really an anomaly. But they moved north by some hundreds of miles, and they set up camp, the Ebens did for them up there. And it was a lot cooler by 30 or 40 degrees. It was still in the 70s, 60s, 70s. But they were more comfortable there in the northern part of the planet. And those pictures, we had pictures of the northern area. They had some vegetation, trees. They had a river, it looked like a river.
Was there an atmosphere, like a blue atmosphere?
There was an atmosphere that was consistent with Earth. It had more of an oxygen content than Earth, but they adjusted to it.
So Jock Doubleday just made a good point in the comments. He said, it's wild that an advanced race would choose to live on a prison planet. So they didn't choose to live on a prison planet. Actually, one of the things you learn is that their planet had been destroyed due to a major volcanic eruption, according to what they were told. And this was like a refugee planet. They were they had to basically resort to this planet, relocate onto whatever planet they were staying on just for the survival of their race. And in that case, it was basically ran by the military, and it was very much of a police state. And who knows if they were looking for new homes or another place to live. Maybe that's why they were so interested in Earth. There's a number of speculations there, but that was not their home planet. And then we are going to get into The Return.
The Return The team remained on Serpo for 13 years. They paid a 3-year penalty for their inability to keep track of Earth time. After all their time devices failed, they tried desperately to translate 1 revolution of Serpo to 1 revolution of Earth, but were not able to keep up accounting discipline. So they were supposed to be there for only 10 years, but it was really, really hard for them to keep track of time and ended up being 13 years. 7 returned. Why some team members remained. The debriefing reported that the team members who remained did so voluntarily. They fell in love with the culture of the EBEs and the planet. They were not ordered to return. Communication with the remaining crew members, the 2 who stayed on Serpo, lasted until about 1988. No other communication was received from those team members. The 2 who died on planet Serpo, 899 and 754, were placed in coffins and buried. Their bodies were returned to Earth. Regarding the debriefing, Anonymous has this to say. The returnees were isolated from 1978 until 1984 at various military installations. The Air Force Office of Special Investigation was responsible for their security and safety. AFOSI also conducted debriefing sessions with the returnees.
So there was a very extensive, long-lasting debriefing process, which again probably was not fun, because if you read the book, it seemed like they were just kind of locked up in cells again, and while they were debriefed, and you can only imagine what that would have been like for them after a very grueling ride home. This next part is interesting. We're going to move on from the actual EBEN mission. So subsequent EBEN visits. In Release 32 by Anonymous, he gives the past and future dates of EBEN visits to Earth. This confirms the 1978 return of the team, 13 years and 1 month from the date of departure. The first 6 return visits were to the Nevada test site. So the EBEN visits from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 occurred and will occur on the following days and dates. Friday, August 18th, 1978. Thursday, August 28th, 1983. Sunday, April 7th, 1991. Tuesday, August 22nd, 1996. Sunday, November 28th, 1999. Wednesday, November 14th, 2001. Thursday, November 12th, 2009, at the U.S. unincorporated territory of Johnson Atoll at the Akau Island, if that's how you say that. So this just interesting to me that these were documented and logged return dates, and there's information that corroborates each of these dates and what actually happened in some of these meetings, like the landing at Johnson Atoll. That's an aerial view of Johnson Atoll. And I was talking with Aaron about this. They could easily have meetings and landings in these remote islands, and no one, the rest of the planet, would know any better. We would have no clue. They wouldn't even have to do it in the middle of the night. At any point they wanted, these craft can just silently land at a private island or a military base, have a meeting, and leave. I mean, we can have daily contact with these beings and many other races, and we're just sitting here in front of our computers. You know, we just don't know any better.
Right.
So this is from the book talking about the landing at the Johnson Atoll. Last month, on Thursday, November 12th, 2009, a visit was made by the EBEs to a remote location on Earth, but it was not to the NTS, the Nevada test site, but instead to the little-known North Pacific Ocean desert island of Johnson Atoll Island. The EBEs paid us a kindly visit for 12 hours between 0600 and 1800 on the U.S. territory, U.S. military time local. The meeting specifically occurred on Akau Island, which is the north island of the sprawling Johnson Atoll system. The EBEs landed on a flat portion of the northwest sector of the island. There were 18 officials from around the world who met the EBEs. They included the following representatives from our planet. Okay, so there was 1 from the Vatican, 2 from the United Nations, 9 from the United States of America, broken down into 1 White House representative from the Obama administration, 2 U.S. intelligence officers, 1 linguist, 5 U.S. military representatives, other countries, and miscellaneous. 1 the People's Republic of China, 1 person from the Russian Federation, and 4 invited special guests, 18 total invited guests. Additionally, a very special set of gifts were exchanged. The EBEs provided us with 6 gifts that would assist us in future technological developments. In return, the Vatican gave the EBEs 2 12th century religious themed paintings. Furthermore, a future meeting date was set for November 2012, in addition to a previously scheduled official visit on Thursday, November 11, 2010 at NTS. And apparently the 2012 visit did happen. Now, these aren't the actual 12th century paintings that were traded. I just took two examples from the internet. But it is interesting to me that they were interested in our religious paintings and our history. Now, according to the Eben history, they had been around for 3,000 years, 2,000 years, and they were around for a lot of our religious events. There's some controversy that claimed that they were even responsible for some of them, and some of the stories that we've read. So that was really hard for some people to grasp, and they don't know if that part was misinformation or not. But regardless, it's there. And we're going to let Richard Doty tell us again about the Yellow Book, where they learned a lot of the Eben history. So the Yellow Book is a device, essentially, that the Ebens gave us that had their entire history on it. And there's an actual book on the internet you can buy on Amazon called The Yellow Book, The History of the Aliens on Earth. And in this book is allegedly a lot of the information that came from the actual Yellow Book device that our government received. Somebody took the information, or some of it anyway, and published it into this book. And allegedly, this book contains the exact information that was retrieved through the Eben exchange program.
EBE 2 presented us with the Yellow Book. This was a remarkable and generous gift to the people of Earth, and clearly demonstrated the aliens' wish to become our galactic friends. About the Yellow Book, Anonymous says, "It isn't exactly a book. It is a block of material approximately 2.5 inches thick and transparent in nature and appearance. The reader looks at the transparent surface and suddenly words and pictures appear. It is an endless series of historical stories and photographs of our universe, the Eben planet and their former homeworld, and other interesting stories about the universe. It also contains an historical story and various accounts about Earth's history and distant past. I am one of the very few people who has actually seen the Yellow Book. As has been commented on by others, it would take a lifetime to read it and another lifetime to understand it."
And we're going to let Richard Doty explain why that is.
Did we learn anything from being with the Ebens about our history, where we came from?
That is an extremely controversial subject or question, because the Ebens told us they've been visiting Earth for approximately 2,000 years. So that brings up a whole lot of questions about the religious aspect of Jesus, and, was Jesus a spaceman? I don't know that answer, and I'm not going to even delve into it. But that brings up some questions, and I don't have those answers. I don't know. I don't know that they told us that they visited Earth 2,000 years ago. In fact, they gave us the Yellow Book. The Yellow Book is a holographic device that if you look at it, you have to be sitting in front of it to look at it, and it recorded the Eben history, including Eben's history of Earth. Now, what the ironic part about this book is, if you're German and you were looking at it, you'd hear everything in German. If I was Russian, I would hear everything in Russian.
Consciousness-assisted technology of some sort.
Exactly, yeah,
right?
Something like that.
Was there anything else that we learned about ourselves and our history from this book?
Yes, but the problem is, I don't know of anyone that actually was able to get through the entire history of the Yellow Book. I mean, the problem with it is I never saw it, and I've never used it. But the people that have, including a very good friend of mine who was able to look at it, and he sat there for several hours. If you put it down and put it back up, it starts all over again. It doesn't read that the fact that you want to start it, and there's no buttons or anything to push. So it might be impossible to sit for 100 days or whatever it is to look at the whole history of what the Ebens have recorded on this in this Yellow Book.
So we're going to get into the three survivors and what happened to them. And I find that all very interesting about the Yellow Book. And it's funny that if you put it down and starts over, it's like an old Nintendo game or something. You couldn't save it. Like you got to play till the end, you know?
Right. All right. There's no bookmark
Right.
feature, or maybe there is, and they just couldn't figure it out.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking there's just something that they didn't understand about it.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But regardless, it's interesting, and I would be curious to read the Yellow Book that's available on the internet, like from the information that was relayed from it. So,
In 2005, Anonymous came forward at a UFO convention in Laughlin. He privately provided several key officials with names and details about 3 survivors who returned from Serpo mission. Now, that shocked everyone at the convention. This person, who we verified was a Defense Intelligence Agency employee, he served with the Defense Intelligence Agency for over 30 years. He gave us the names, the actual names of 3 survivors. And we were going to be able to interview these 3 survivors. Joseph Yeager claimed to be one of the former mission directors for Project Crystal Night. Now, people within the UFO community know the name Joseph Yeager. He spoke before at conventions, UFO conventions. He has spoken on some podcasts, some YouTube videos are still probably out there with his name on it. Years ago, in the beginning of the internet, beginning of websites, beginning of podcasts, he was interviewed by Art Bell back in about 92 or 93. Not mentioning Project Serpo back in those days, but he did mention one particular UFO researcher found a mention of Project Crystal Night back in the 1990s. Yeager provided 600 cassette tapes allegedly made by the team commander during the journey to Serpo and while on the planet Serpo. Now, here we have 600 tapes, recordings of the team commander. Were these tapes real? Did they contain extraordinary information about the planet, about the space travel from Earth to the planet Serpo?
yeah, so it's interesting that some of the survivors, actually McKeever, one of these guys, which he's going to talk about next, actually decided to come forward and actually start talking. And he did speak at, I believe, a UFO convention before he died, but we'll go ahead and play that next video.
So what happened to all those astronauts that went to Zeta Reticuli? Like, what happened to them to this day?
Well, they're all dead now.
Right.
The ones that came back, they were suffering from radiation sickness. They got cancer of the skin or lungs or other types of cancers. One lived, the last one to live was actually the team commander. He lived for a number of years, but then he died about 6 or 7 years ago. And he was the one that spoke at the private UFO convention. Wendell Stevens got him to speak at it.
What was his name?
McKeever. His last name was McKeever. And he was an amazing speaker. He spoke from the heart. He really, really valued the EBEs. I mean, they were so tender-hearted. They were compassionate. He saw them all in their best. He never saw them in their worst. Even when our team members got so upset with certain other things that were occurring, that there were confrontations between the Americans and the EBEs, the EBEs never got upset. There was always a mediation. They always tried to, let's just settle this down. You're our guests here, and and they always gave in. He said almost every time the EBEs gave in to the Americans. Not every time, like when they wanted to visit the structure, the homes of no, that's not going to happen. and they warned him not to go in there. And one tried, and he was escorted out. And please don't do that. And
so I titled this one "Compassion for the EBEs." It's important to note this because What we're going to get into next is the last segment of this. There's only 4 slides left, but it's talking about the grand deception and why we might have been duped by the Ebens and the Greys, and or if there was a difference between the two or not. But it's understandable that we would have been tricked and deceived by this group because of, like, McGeever, he had a compassion for the Ebens, and all the astronauts became friends with them. Some of them stayed, they fell in love with them so much they stayed behind. They decided to live out the rest of their life on Serpo. And at the very end of this, we're going to play a clip from Dan Burish where he explains his involvement with EBE-1, essentially J-Rod, the original Roswell survivor, and his interactions with him and how he felt compassion for the survivor as well. So it's just like, we're humans, right? And we see the good in people. And whenever you're one-on-one, it doesn't matter if it's with another person or an ET, even if it's like, let's just say it's somebody bad on our planet. Like, when you spend enough time with somebody, you can get to know them and you start to feel for them, right? And I think that's what started happening with the Ebens. I think that once we got to know them so closely, we start to see their soft spots, and oh, they're very emotional beings. Actually, they're not as robotic as we thought. Now, there are the Greys that are the programmed life forms, which there's a whole discrepancy and a controversy there as well. But either way, I think it's important to understand why we would have been deceived, because it would be very easy to be deceived by a group when you develop compassion for them. So this last section is called The Grand Deception. And this information comes from the Dulce Protocol, which is a very thick textbook of UFO ET history, primarily the Dulce base, but so much more. And I'll let Aaron read this next slide. This is from the book talking about the Grand Deception and what happened after all this took place.
By 1984, MJ-12 must have been in stark terror at the mistake they had made in dealing with the EBEs. They had subtly promoted Close Encounters of the Third Kind and ET to get the public used to odd-looking aliens that were compassionate, benevolent, and very much our space brothers. MJ-12 sold the EBEs to the public and was now faced with the fact that quite the opposite was true. In addition, a plan was formulated in 1968 to make the public aware of the existence of aliens on Earth over the next 20 years, to be culminated with several documentaries to be released during 1985 to 1987 period of time. These documentaries would explain the history and intentions of the EBEs. The discovery of the Grand Deception put the entire plans, hopes, and dreams of MJ-12 into utter confusion and panic.
So listen to that. They had documentaries prepared to be released in the 80s, disclosing information about the extraterrestrials before what they call the Grand Deception, before they realized that the Ebens were not who we thought they were. And to me, that's significant information to understand why the secrecy remains. Because who knows what actually happened after that? Who knows what this Grand Deception actually looked like? I think the Battle of Dulce, had something to do with that, and the discovery that they made below at the lowest levels of the Dulce base of the genetic experiment and the abductions, and they were kind of not keeping up their end of the treaty. They weren't reporting all the humans that they were abducting, and the genetic experiments and the hybrid programs and all that stuff. So before the Grand Deception was discovered, and according to a meticulous plan for a metered release of information to the public, several documentaries and videotapes were made. William Moore, a Burbank, California-based UFO researcher who wrote The Roswell Incident, a book published in 1980 that detailed the crash, recovery, and subsequent cover-up of a UFO with 4 alien bodies, has a videotape of 2 newsmen interviewing a military officer associated with MJ-12. I guess the important part of this is the first part. They literally had information. They had planned a metered release of information to the public. Several documentaries and videotapes were made. I would love to see those tapes. And, Corey Good, whatever you would like to think of him, he told us the same thing. He said there were documentaries made and ready to sitting on the shelf ready to go whenever we finally get full disclosure, that they would be released. And he said, and in particular, one that I just remember was there was a documentary about the moon and what's actually on the moon, and including inside the moon. And it was like he said the documentary was basically like giving a tour of the lava tubes and stuff and the bases. In particular, NASA had a station set up inside the moon. Anyway, the following was an addendum to the above that was included with later copies of John Lear's statement. So this is from John Lear. In 1983, when the Grand Deception was discovered, MJ-12, which may now be designated as PI-40, started to work on a weapon or some kind of device to contain the EBEs, which had by now totally infested our society. This program was funded through SDI, I guess Strategic Defense Intelligence, I'm not sure, which coincidentally was initiated at approximately the same date. A frantic effort has been made over the past 4 years by all participants. This program ended in failure in December of 1987. So at this time, they were trying to weaponize, they were trying to figure out a way to, I guess, eliminate the EBEs, the Ebens, the Greys from our planet, because according to this, they had totally infested our society. Whatever that means, I don't know. Whether that means the underground bases, hiding in plain sight among us, I guess we can only speculate. And then, Aaron, did you have anything to add to this before we play this final video of Dan Burrish?
No.
So this is the last video we're going to play, and this doesn't have to do with the Serpo mission, but it does have to do with Dan Burrish and his time with J-Rod, the lone Roswell survivor. And again, how we developed compassion for these beings and why it makes sense that we would have been deceived.
The gentleman with which I was associated was approximately 3.5 feet tall. He had a dark brown appearance, very ruddy appearance to his skin. He was in a highly pressurized clean sphere. 3.5 feet, large head in comparison to torso, large bulbous black eyes. The whites of the eyes had been selected out, so it looked like a large pupil, basically. When you look into his eyes, you feel like you're going to fall into his eyes forever. And I think that probably had something to do with the telepathic nature of his mental structure. He was hunched over most of the time, could not support himself fully, given muscular atrophy, and that had to do with the peripheral neuropathy under which he was suffering. He was unclothed, which bothered him. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused in every turn. Called himself captive, and justifiably so. His facial features were grotesque in comparison to what he showed me what normal would be. Nose was recessed, an extremely small mouth, a hard palate, no teeth.
Do you have any idea what his chronological age was?
622. They excrete in a manner that we would excrete. Their external genitalia are different than ours. The females have somewhat like vulva, but they have a clasper situation. The male has a male clasper, the female claspers. And if it looks like a disc with rectangular solids that are rotated into position for clasping at the inguinal region. They do have internal fertilization.
Now, this was something you read because you didn't see a female, did you?
No, this is something he showed me of his wife. Everything that he showed me when this was the incident. When he projected it into me, it felt like I was there. He was extremely depressed. If we were to term him human, I would. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I think he would be termed as clinically depressed. Okay. He wept, but he didn't weep outside. He wept when he was with me.
Well, could you estimate what his level of intellect was?
Smarter than me. He He was smarter than me by a long range.
Did he have a wide range of knowledge?
The mathematics that he showed me blew my mind.
Was that right?
He showed me concurrently not only the equations for the rule of nines, but he also did so diagrammatically, and he did so with three-dimensional, like a VRML system, where I was watching cubes come together. Highly evolved, highly intellectual, highly repressed emotionally. When I was with him, I felt great happiness to be with him, but I could feel his great sadness, not only because of what he wanted to become, what he knew he was by being present with us, but where he was and how he was being treated. He was not part of the group that has to be catered to involving the T9 treaty that was just signed. He wanted to help. He was willing. When I went in, for God's sakes, I took well over, nearly 300 individualized aspiration samples from his neurological system. He would hold his arm out for me to take them. There was no pain medication. And whenever I would fire the introduction system to remove the sample, it was an aspirative avulsion system, he would cry, and then he would just stand there and look at me.
If that doesn't confuse you, right? I mean, like you can develop compassion and you feel bad for these beings, yet at the same time, they're abducting us and they're not keeping up their end of the deal. You can understand why we would have finally given in and decided, oh, they're not so bad. We're going to disclose this to the public, and then only to realize that that wasn't the case. Now that's considering that we have the full picture, which we don't. We're just taking the bits and pieces that we can find and putting it together and trying to paint a picture here. So there could be a very distinct difference between the EBEs from the Serpo mission and the Greys that he's talking about. We don't know, but they do seem to be one and the same after everything that I've looked at. I just don't know. So did you want to add anything to that, Aaron?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like you said, it could be the same. It could be a completely different group. I know when people say Greys, as if it's just one species that looks like that, that's very incorrect. There are thousands and thousands of species that look gray-like, you could say, that have the big eyes, the small body with the big head, the typical gray look. There's, from many accounts, from everything I've researched, there are thousands upon thousands of species that have variations of that style of look to their species. And I can only assume there's a whole spectrum of beings, from very benevolent, you could say, to very malevolent, you could say, beings that all have that type of look. I mean, we've heard about like the tall Greys, for example, that are supposed to be very malevolent, that seem to be working with the reptilians in some capacity and seem to be harming humanity, or at least in the past. Now, whether those are these same beings, I don't think so. That doesn't mean these beings are super benevolent. Maybe they're more kind of on the neutral part of the scale, where they're kind of like, they're kind of just out for their own benefit, but at the same time, they don't necessarily want to like harm humanity also. But
right,
they're kind of doing what they need to do to survive, kind of thing that they feel is justified, and maybe
right.
they have a different kind of moral system than we kind of do, or we would view it as like things they're doing as immoral. Maybe they're viewing it differently, right?
Right. Yeah, all very valid perspectives. And like this person says, Victitious says, maybe there's some good groups and some bad groups, just like the humans. I
There
mean,
are.
that's basically in a nutshell. I think that's the gist of it. Yeah.
And there are, and anyone who tells you differently, because we all hear people say, no, all ETs are benevolent, no, all ETs are bad and evil, and I would say those are both incorrect. There's a mixture of both, and obviously good and evil are even relative to, I would say, I would more accurately use the law of one terms, which is service to self or service to others, and just to describe beings more. And you could call like the negative reptilians, they are very service to self at the expense of others, because all they care about is their own survival, and they will do anything they have to do that they feel necessary. Well, maybe this group is kind of right in the middle, somewhere in the middle of that, of where they're not like super extreme on either end, where they're kind of more in the neutral of like,
Right.
they're doing what they feel like they need to do and using the best, their moral system that they have.
Well, if you remember book one of Sands of Time, whenever they were underneath Dulce, and there was Lord Tugi or Tugi, however you say it,
Yeah.
the guy who was kind of running the show down there. Excuse me. He discovered that even they weren't given the full scope of information on why they were here on Earth. And I remember when he learned from us, like the actual deal that was made, he was very furious with his own people. So, I mean, there's a lot of politics involved here as well. And so there's nothing is black and white. And
Right.
they're like, even the grays that are doing what they're doing in evens, like they're left in the dark. It's still compartmentalized. They don't know the full scope of the deals that have been made, the treaties, the protocols, whatever. So I just think that, like I said, there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of shady deals and backstabbing. There's a lot of greedy, ego-driven decisions that are made, and
Right.
power-hungry people in these positions of power that are not the ones who should be making the decisions. And I'm
Right.
sure it's some of our decisions and some of the things that we've done to them prompted them to do things to us. So
Right.
in their eyes, we're probably the bad guys. So
Right.
there's so
Well, think
many
about
ways to
it.
look at this. Yeah.
Right. Think about it. If these are the beings from Roswell, supposedly we're the ones that crashed their craft, right?
Right.
And killed
Yeah.
killed all but one of the beings on those craft.
Yeah, we
And
threw up the frequency net. Yeah.
that could be interpreted as an act of war, and they could be like, okay, well, now we're justified in doing this,
Right.
because
Right.
that's how they started the interaction with us, and that's who they might make, oh, well, these beings are very primitive, which relative to them, yeah, we are very primitive.
Right.
And the way we view insects or something, they could be viewing us, oh, we can just do whatever we want to experiment on them and abduct and do these things. And even though we
So-
made an agreement, but then like they supposedly made an agreement with us saying they would do certain things, they wouldn't do certain, and that's where
Right.
I would say they were deceptive, because obviously they didn't
Right.
hold up to that agreement and just do whatever they
Right.
wanted to.
Well, like Tony Rodriguez said, what he remembers from the programs is it was like a playbook. They would go from planet to planet and make bad deals with the planet's government, knowing that they weren't going to keep up their end of the deal. And that
Right.
was how they got in. That's how they initially got in with us to initially start the takeover, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that could have been their ulterior motive the entire time. There's so many things to look at.
Right.
But just to get back to the book and just to start wrapping this up, so the appendices in the book is, well, the epilogue for one talks about the even technology, and then a lot more about the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And then the appendices, there's quite a lot here that they talk about the team training curriculum, the supplies and equipment, all the details you would want to know, the Serpo statistics, Serpo planetary motion and time measurement comments, the EBEN energy device, the crystal rectangle, the EBEN propulsion system, EBEN religious beliefs, the Defense Intelligence Agency by Victor Martinez, deep space probes, back engineered alien craft, a disclosure project statement, an excerpt from President Reagan's briefing on March 1981, a framework for public acclamation, and the Serpo team debriefing film narration. We didn't cover any of that. I mean, there's so much more. I recommend guys pick this book up, read it, and then even the beginning of the book, it gives you an entire back history of how we even got to a point on this planet to where we were even making a deal with these beings. It talks about Germany, Antarctica, Roswell, Los Alamos, Kingman, Kennedy. So it literally starts in the early 1900s in Germany, the late 1800s. It talks about what happened with the Real Society and the reptilians and Antarctica and the bases in Antarctica, all the way up to Roswell and Operation High Jump. I mean, it gives an amazing history of what happened even before the Serpo mission. So I can't recommend this book enough. And if you want the actual email thread, Project Serpo, this book, it's a pretty hefty book. I haven't read through all of it because a lot of the emails don't even pertain to the Serpo mission, but there's some amazing information. And we did reference this book. And then the Dulce Protocol, like I said, this giant thick textbook from, I mean, it is a UFO history. It contains a lot of information from other books, including stuff that I don't know where they actually obtain this information. There's nothing. This book is kind of out of context. There's no introduction. There's no appendix. There's no index. It doesn't tell you really anything, but it's loaded with information of our UFO history and our government's involvement
and
with the extraterrestrials.
Right. And the Lynn Kasten's Serpo book, The Secret Journey to Planet Serpo, you can get for about, looks like 17 something on Amazon or on eBay. You can get it a few dollars cheaper used. So, you know, under 20 bucks, not too much. And I highly recommend it. It's a must read and a must have book if you're into any of this stuff, in my opinion.
And we've referenced it a million times in all of our webinars and so many episodes of the podcast. It's just one of those must-haves if you need to understand, if you want to understand, you know, what's happened on this planet. And I would say this and the Sands of Time books are like go hand in hand as far as being crucial in understanding what's even happening today.
Right.
We're just getting such a dog and pony show at this point from the mainstream, you know, this new ufology UAP report bullshit, you know. They're literally, like I said, like we said at the beginning, they're trying to rewrite history to avoid accountability. Because like that man
they're trying to control the narrative still. You know, just they're like, oh yeah, we're giving you disclosure now after all these decades of ridiculing it and lying and saying none of this is real. But they're doing it only because they're forced to because of where we're at in history.
but like the guy said at the beginning, though, it's not a matter of UFO disclosure. He goes, it's a national scandal. Like he said, it's a scandal. Like
absolutely, no, it's a crime against humanity. It's an absolute crime. These people are guilty of crimes against humanity going back decades and decades. And it's a control system too. That's what people need to understand, like how much of a control system this is, that there are even people that want to disclose the truth, but they're not able to. For one, they're not briefed. The people that are actually briefed on like any truth are usually people you're never even going to see in the publicly. Or the ones that are, they're only a tiny bit, like David Grush. Like, yeah, he was briefed on a teeny tiny bit, and he was brave enough to say it, and even that is like a miracle based on history of, you know. But people are, if you're thinking like that's anywhere close to what there is to disclose of what's been going, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke.
And there isn't any one individual that's going to come forward and give you the full picture because they don't have it.
They don't have it.
Nobody does.
Even if they wanted to, they don't have it. Right.
No one. They're going to tell you what they know from their compartmentalized standpoint. I mean,
everything is highly compartmentalized, and everything's need to know. And like even in the compartments, there is so much, I would say, disinfo that is given to the compartments
Right. Which
strategically
is
so that they think everything they're being told is all true, but there's a lot of disinfo mixed in with truth, I would say, in every single one of
which
those
is
departments.
explained greatly in the Sands of Times books,
Right.
how the disinformation was implemented and how it works and how extensive it is. So anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for being here. It looks like there's still a number of people here, so we appreciate you guys. We can't do this without you. As you can tell, this takes hours, days, weeks to put this stuff together. And we don't want to just kind of phone it in and give you guys some bullshit presentation. So we really do pour our heart and soul into this, and we appreciate you guys being here and even giving us an audience to present this to. We love you all. Your support on Patreon means the world to us. And we encourage you to please share this with everybody. We are being so heavily shadow banned right now. It's ridiculous. On social media, we just can't get out. We're just not gaining much traction ever since we lost our YouTube channel. We're still doing good and we're not going to stop, but we are really trying to get out there right now. And it's just not happening like we would hope, but we understand it's election year and they're just, stomping down on us. So any help is greatly appreciated. As much as you want to share this information, and share our Patreon and just our Rumble channel on our website and anything that we do, we would greatly appreciate it. And we truly appreciate all of you guys for being here. We love each and every single one of you, and we can't do this without you. So that being said, Aaron, if you want to say something else.
Everything Tyler just said. I second that. Thank you guys so much. We love you so much. Your support means the world to us. We couldn't do this without you. And oh, by the way, if you do prefer to watch us on YouTube, which I know some people do, I know I tried just the other day to watch our recent episode on the TV and pull up Rumble, and it's impossible. You can't do it. It's like it does not work with TVs. And so that's one benefit of YouTube. I did create this is try number 5 for YouTube. So we got deleted back in January initially off YouTube, and then I tried to make 3 more attempts, all got deleted. They were hitting us with strikes on different videos that they weren't hitting before. So they really, like Tyler said, they're really stomping down right now on the censorship. The election year, they do it every time. They really don't want the truth of things getting out. But this is attempt number 5. We'll see how long it stays up. But for now, that we do have a YouTube channel again, and if you want to subscribe to that, feel free. I'm uploading not every video, but kind of like the best ones going back, and I'm almost caught up to where we're at now. And then then it'll be every recent episode at probably in a week or so will be uploaded on YouTube. And then you'll have the option to watch on if you're a person who likes to watch on your TV, you can use YouTube to do that, because Rumble does not work for that.
Yeah, and make sure you check out our new website, journeytotruth.online. It's actually really hard to find on Google, I found out. So journeytotruth.online, sign up for a newsletter. We're doing a monthly newsletter. And it's just updates about things we're doing, conferences we'll be at, and things of that nature. So make sure you check out the website, subscribe to the newsletter. We just put one out today if you missed it, but yeah. Stay tuned for all that stuff. And thank you guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We love you all. Good night. Have a great evening. Until next time.
Good night, guys. Thanks so much.